You step into the flat-bottomed boat while the sky is still a deep, starless grey, the air thick with a mist that settles on everything. The planks under your worn leather boots feel cool and faintly slick with dew, each board giving the smallest creak as your weight shifts forward. This boat is built of oak, its rib shaped by a man who worked in a shed by the estate's sawpit many years ago, the curved timbers now darkened with age and water. Between the planks, the seams are packed with a mixture of tar and hemp, carefully pressed into every gap to keep the pond from seeping through, a craft that your own father once checked by running a thumb along the joints. The smooth grain of the punting pole rests across the gunwales, an ash pole worn honey-colored from years of hands gripping it, its surface polished by friction and the minerals of the pond water. You pick it up and feel the familiar weight, the slight tackiness of old varnish, the narrow end wet from yesterday's work and still beaded with tiny drops. Your clothing is simple wool, a tunic and breeches in a soft brown grey that blends with the morning damp at the shoulders and knees from the humidity that clings to the reeds. A wide-brimmed felt hat keeps the mist from settling directly on your hair, and you tug it down slightly as a habit. The pond before you lies perfectly still, its surface invisible except where the bulk of the reeds rises like a darker wall, and the mist turns the world into a bowl of cool silence. No birds call yet. No wind moves. Only the faint smell of wet earth and decaying leaves rises from the water. You fit the pole into your hands, finding the balance point that years of work have taught you, and you push the boat away from the small wooden landing stage with a slow, even pressure. The boat glides forward without resistance, the hull moving through water that is more felt than seen, a soft liquid sigh the only sound. You stand near the stern, legs slightly apart to keep steady, and you lower the foot of the pole into the pond until it touches the bottom. The mud yields with a gentle sucking sensation that travels up the shaft, a soft grip that holds for a moment before you lift the pole and let the water drip from it in a short scattered patter. As soon as the pole is clear, you push again, the ash flexing just a little under the strain, and the boat slides deeper into the mist. The rhythm of this work is slower than a heartbeat, each cycle a single quiet event that melts into the next without hurry. The reeds at the edge of the pond are common reeds, tall and closely packed, their green stalks turning brownish gold near the plumes. When the boat drifts close to them, the outermost leaves brush the hull with a dry whisper, and the pole sometimes taps a hollow stem, producing a low, woody note. You steer by placing the pole at a slight angle to the boat's side, letting the pressure turn you gently, and soon you are moving along a narrow channel that the reeds keep open, a lane of dark water that only the bailiff's boat ever travels. The mist lies on the surface like a heavy blanket, and you can see only the nearest stalks, everything else softened into a blur of grey-green. Time slows in this place, and each push of the pole becomes a way of measuring the morning. The pole enters the silty bottom with a soft plunge, your hands feeling the sediment's texture as a series of tiny vibrations, the loose flock of decayed leaves, the fine clay that grips more firmly, the occasional grit of a tiny shell. When you lift the pole, the water drains off in droplets that strike the pond's surface with small separate sounds, and you take a breath while the boat coasts on its own momentum. The forward motion is so smooth that you hardly sense it, only the faint shift of your own weight and the slow closing of the reed wall behind you. Another push, and the ash pole bends into a shallow arc, the power of your arms translating through the shaft and into the water, sending the boat forward by another 6 or 8 feet. Each push is followed by a long pause during which you listen, and the listening fills the space between actions with the softest soundtrack of the pond. In that quiet, you notice the mist condensing on your sleeve, tiny beads forming on the wool and staying there like pinpricks of light that do not yet shine. Your breathing is slow and regular, your chest rising and falling with the same unhurried cadence as the boat's movement through the water. The reeds to either side form a corridor that is just wide enough for the boat, their plumes nodding slightly from the disturbance of your passing, and when you glance over your shoulder, you see the mist closing behind you like a door. The world is reduced to grey water, grey air, and the slow creak of wood, a creak that comes not from any one plank, but from the whole structure as it adjusts to your weight and the steady pressure of the pole and the oarlock. The oarlock itself is a simple iron fork worn smooth, and it holds the pole loosely when you let it rest, so that the shaft drips without any other sound. You continue to pole, and the bottom changes under you, becoming softer where a small feeder stream brings its silt into the pond centuries after the stream was first dammed. You know this spot without seeing it, because the pole sinks deeper and the resistance lessens, making each lift a little slower. The mist carries the faint, clean smell of freshwater mussels from the inflow area, a scent so subtle that it is almost a memory rather than a present thing. A small eddy swirls behind the boat as you push through it, the water giving a quiet plop, and then the surface settles back to glassy stillness. You ease the pole down again and walk your hands along it, a motion that moves the boat forward without turning the water white. A skill that took your younger self many seasons to learn. Your thoughts are not absent, but they move at the same pace as the pond, drifting from the feel of the ash under your palms to the slight chill in the air, to the way the mist muffles even the sound of your own pulse. You remember your father doing this same work, his back straight and his hands steady on the same pole, and you remember how he would pause at the same bend in the reed channel to listen for the first rooks of the day. But those memories come without sharp edges, just soft images that dissolve back into the grey like the mist itself. The boat moves on, and the reeds part with a soft whisper that could be the sound of water lapping at their dense root mat, a woven raft of living plants that floats at the pond's margin. After a while, you reach a section where the reeds thin out and the pond opens, though you cannot see the far bank. The mist here is thicker, a cool vapor that clings to your cheeks and makes the brim of your hat damp, and you stop poling to let the boat drift. The silence that follows is not empty, but layered with the faintest sounds. A single drop of water falling from a reed tip into the pond, the distant gurgle of a coot settling somewhere to your left, the tiny creak of your own boat as the wood expands with the first hint of approaching daylight. You stand motionless, the pole raised so the water runs down the shaft and cools your fingers, and you feel the pond breathing around you. After this brief stop, you resume the slow work, the pole sliding through your hands as you find the bottom again. The sediment now is a mix of fine silt and decayed plant fibers that coat the tip of the pole in a thin, blackish mud. As you push, a few tiny bubbles break the surface a yard from the boat, the only sign of a carp stirring beneath, and they burst with a soft hiss that you feel more than hear. The carp are still sluggish in the cool of early morning, resting near the bottom, their large bronze bodies hovering just above the mud. You do not see them, but your work connects you to them through the pole's touch, through the knowledge of the pond's secret life. The light begins to change almost imperceptibly, the grey mist taking on a very faint pearlescent quality that tells you the sun is climbing behind the tree line to the east. You steer the boat toward a favourite route along the northern edge of the pond, where an old willow leans over the water and the roots form a canopy of sorts. The pole pushes into a patch of firm sand there, a place where the estate's builders once laid a gravel walkway long before the pond was dug, and the resistance is a satisfying gritty scrape that steadies the boat. You follow this submerged path for a dozen strokes, your body moving in a rhythm that has become automatic, and the mist forms a dome around you that holds the sound of your work close. With each push, the water opens ahead and closes behind, the boat leaving no visible wake because you move so slowly. The reeds that surround you are dense with life you cannot see, small frogs clinging to the stems, moths resting with wings folded, spiders spinning webs that the mist fills with tiny droplets until they look like lacework. You see a web now between two reed stalks, and you guide the boat just far enough away to avoid breaking it, the pole touching the bottom at a different angle to shift your course. The web trembles as a trapped midge struggles, but you pass by and it is gone into the mist, another small event in the quiet tapestry of the pond. The physical sensation of poling is a continuous loop that you no longer think about, your arms moving through the push, lift, drip, and reach in a gentle flow. You shift your weight from one foot to the other to keep the boat balanced, and the hull rocks softly, a motion that is almost imperceptible. The soles of your boots have pressed a slight hollow into the plank where you always stand, a record of your years of service. The wood is smooth under your feet, the grain lines still visible despite the wear. The boat itself is a good craft, flat-bottomed and stable, its bow just upturned enough to part the reeds without snapping them. The caulking holds true and no water seeps in, though the bilge always carries a faint, cool dampness that smells of old leaves. The world continues to lighten, the mist now shot through with a subtle amber tint that grows from the east. You can see the individual reeds more clearly, their brown plumes dusted with droplets that catch the earliest touch of color. The water's surface reflects nothing yet, still too dark, but you can see a few pale patches where open water lies beyond the reed fringe. You decide to move toward one of these openings, to give the boat a longer drift, and to check the condition of the wattle screens at the far end of the pond. Though that is still a long way off, you push on, the pole finding a mix of sand and leaf litter, and the boat moves with a steady, silent glide. Now the first rook calls in the far distance, a single call that is smothered by the mist into something soft and low. It is the signal that the world beyond the pond is slowly waking, but here on the water nothing stirs except your boat and the small ringlets that spread from each pole stroke. You listen to that distant bird as you push again, the sound anchoring you to the larger landscape while you remain suspended in this pocket of grey. The rook's nest in the copse behind the manor house, a place you have walked past many times after leaving the boat, and their morning chorus will soon build into a steady murmur that reaches across the parkland. But that is still minutes away, and for now, the one call is enough. The mist shifts as you enter a broader channel, thinning in patches so that you can see the dark shape of the old willow on your right, its drooping branches trailing into the water. Dew falls from its leaves in an intermittent patter that sounds like a very slow rain, and you steer the boat to pass under the outermost tips. The pole touches the bottom, and you feel the tangle of roots under the mud, the cross-hatched resistance of a tree's hidden support. You lift the pole carefully to avoid snagging, then push again in a clearer spot. The water under the willow is the darkest you have yet seen, a deep brown-black that holds no reflection, but it is clean and clear, a sign that the carp keep the bottom free of excessive muck by their constant slow foraging. As you come out from under the willow, you pause and let the boat drift again, the pole resting across the gunwales. The water on your hands begins to dry in the cooler air, leaving a faint, powdery feel of dried silt. You look back at the reed channel you have just left, and it is already filling with mist again, as if the pond is tidying the path behind you. The silence returns in increments. First the settling of your own weight, then the dropping of a single willow leaf onto the surface, then the quiet so deep you hear your own blood moving. The grey air wraps around you and you stand in the middle of a world that asks nothing, a world made of water and vapor and the steady, ancient patience of growing things. You pick up the pole once more, the motion slow and deliberate, and you push on into the continuance of the morning. The common reed that lines this nobleman's carp pond goes by the Latin name Framites, or Stralis, though you have never called it anything but reed, a word that holds within it the swish of dry stalks and the nodding of feathery plumes. As your flat-bottomed boat slides alongside a dense stand, you can see that these reeds rise a good 10 or 12 feet above the waterline, their stems as thick as a man's thumb near the base and tapering to a slender wand at the very top. Each stem is a hollow tube, segmented by solid nodes that you can feel with your fingers if you reach out and brush a stalk. The surface smooth and slightly glossy, with a natural wax that sheds water. The lower leaves, long and grass-like, droop downward in a fountain shape, and many of them are already showing a pale yellow color along the edges, the first sign of the season changing from summer's full green into the bronze of early autumn. The mist that still hangs over the pond collects on these leaves in 1,000 tiny beads, each one clinging to the fine ridges of the leaf surface before growing too heavy and slipping off to join the dark water below. You let the boat drift very close, the blunt bow nudging a few outer stalks aside with a soft rustle, and you notice how the reeds grow not as separate plants, but as a single interconnected colony. Under the mud their roots called rhizomes run horizontally in a thick mat that can stretch for many yards, sending up new shoots at every joint. This root mat is so dense and so old that it holds the bank together, a floating raft of living fiber that rises and falls slightly with the water level across the seasons. If you were to push the pole straight down through a gap, you would feel it first penetrate a layer of loose organic muck, then meet the springy resistance of the rhizomes, and finally sink into the firm clay beneath. But you do not test this now. You simply observe, as the mist parts enough to reveal the full height of the reed wall. The brown feathery plumes at the top of each stem nod in the still air, and when you watch them for a long moment, you see that the motion is not random, but a gentle, collective swaying that travels through the whole stand like a slow breath. These plumes are the flowering heads, each one a dense panicle of silky spikelets that appeared weeks ago and will remain through the winter, slowly shredding into thin wisps that float away on any wind strong enough to carry them. A very faint, dusty scent rises from the plumes, not sweet, but dry and vegetal, mingling with the cool moisture of the mist. Occasionally, a tiny bird, a reed warbler perhaps, shifts somewhere deep inside the stalks, producing a series of soft chirps that break the silence without disturbing it, little notes that seem to belong to the reeds themselves. You pick up the punting pole from where it rests across the gunwales and give a single gentle push that moves the boat another few feet along the reed margin. As the boat glides, the outermost leaves brush the hull with a sound so soft it is like breathing heard from a short distance. The pole, when you lift it clear, carries up a faint smell of the bottom, a blend of wet clay, decomposing leaves, and the slightly metallic tang of water that has been still for too long. You let the pole trail for a moment, its tip just skimming the surface, and the small ripple spreads outward until it laps against a reed stem, making the stalk dip and rise again with a tiny hollow tap. That tapping sound, the meeting of water and hollow plant tube, is one you have heard thousands of times, and it always seems to you like the pond's own quiet language, a signal passed from stalk to stalk. The humidity of the early morning lies on your skin with a cool weight, and you can smell the general atmosphere of the pond more clearly now that you are close to the reeds. It is a layered scent, the clean, almost tasteless smell of open fresh water at the top. Beneath that, the richer, earthier note of decaying vegetation from the reed litter that accumulates at the water's edge year after year, and deepest of all the faint sourness of the anaerobic mud where old stalks have fallen and slowly turned to black peat. None of these smells is unpleasant. They are simply the authentic odors of a healthy pond, the smell of life slowly consuming itself to make more life. You breathe them in without thinking, your body accustomed to this particular air, and the moisture that enters your lungs feels as soft as the mist itself. The green and gold wall of reeds stretches ahead as far as you can see, though the mist hides its true extent. In some places the stalks are so thick that they form an impenetrable barrier, and only the narrow channel that you and your father before you have kept open allows the boat to pass. In other spots, the reeds thin out into small bays where the water is visible, its surface a dark mirror that reflects the color of the stems with a slight jade tint. You notice how the lower leaves, the ones that droop into the water, are coated in a fine film of algae, a soft green fuzz that tiny aquatic snails are slowly grazing. You see one such snail, a small brown spiral shell attached to a submerged leaf, moving with a slowness that makes your own boat seem fast. The snails, like the reeds, have always been here, part of the pond's quiet economy. A dragonfly lands on a dead reed stalk just ahead of the boat, its body a slender blue-green needle, its forewings spread like panes of the finest glass. It rests there, utterly still, and you stop poling to avoid disturbing it, the boat coasting to a near halt with the pole held motionless above the water. In that pause, you hear the reeds more keenly, the soft hiss of leaves sliding against each other, the minute creak of the stems as they adjust to some subterranean settling of the root mat, and the plink of a water droplet falling from a high leaf into the pond. The dragonfly tilts its head, the compound eyes glittering with 100 tiny reflections of the grey sky. Then it lifts off with a dry rattle of wings and disappears into the mist. You resume your slow progress, and soon you pass a place where last week's storm has bent a cluster of reeds inward, their tops dipping down to touch the water. The stalks are folded but not broken, the resilient fibers allowing them to bend into an arch, and from this arch the plumes trail in the water, leaving faint streaks on the surface. You note this damage without concern. The reeds will right themselves partly, and those that do not will become perches for dragonflies or shelter for the small perch that hunt among the stems. The pond heals its own small wounds, and your job is simply to observe and sometimes to trim a passage if it closes too tightly. But that is not needed today. Today you are here to drift and to note the condition of things, and the reeds are in good order. The light continues to change, the mist now taking on a faint golden undertone that tells you the sun is rising higher behind the wood. This new light catches the yellowing lower leaves and makes them glow against the darker green above, giving the reed wall the look of a tapestry woven in many tones. You see the delicate veins on each leaf, parallel lines that run from base to tip, and you see how the beads of mist on those leaves now hold tiny pinpricks of brightness. The whole stand seems to exhale, releasing a slight increase in humidity as the sun warms the air, and you feel the temperature on your face shift by the smallest degree, from the cool of deep night to the first mild touch of day. As the boat moves into a section where the reeds are slightly shorter due to a deeper part of the pond, you can see over the plumes to the grey outlines of alder trees growing on the far bank. Their trunks are thick and dark, and their foliage is a blur. Between them and the reed margin, a stretch of open water lies perfectly calm, its surface reflecting the sky in a way that makes it hard to tell where the water ends and the mist begins. A few coots are muttering in that open area, their calls a series of low, metallic ticks that echo softly. They stay hidden in the thicker reeds, and you do not try to find them. Their presence is simply another thread in the quiet fabric of the pond. Your father told you once, when you were young and learning this work, that the reeds could tell you the health of the whole pond. If they grew too thick, the water might become stagnant, choked with dead stalks. If they retreated, it might mean the carp were eating the new shoots too eagerly, tearing at the tender white roots. But this pond is in balance. The reeds and the fish in the water all holding each other in a slow, circular relationship that needs only the lightest human touch. You see this balance now as you look at the new green shoots pushing up among the old brown ones. The next generation already preparing itself for the following spring, even as this year's growth fades. The cycle is so seamless you cannot mark where one stage ends and another begins. The smell of the reeds changes as the day warms them, releasing a faint, sweetish fragrance like dried hay, a scent that rises and mixes with the general pond air. You steer the boat into a small inlet where the reeds grow especially tall, their plumes arching overhead to form a tunnel of sorts. The light here is dimmer, the mist still thick in the shadows, and the sound of the water lapping against the hull takes on a more enclosed quality, a gentle echo. You push the pole into the mud and let the boat stop entirely, holding it in place while you simply look and listen. In this green tunnel, the only colours are the gold of the dying leaves, the brown of the plumes, and the deep olive of the water, which reflects the reed wall as a wavering darker version of itself. You can see at the waterline the ridged scars on the reed stems from which old leaves have fallen away, each scar a ring of pale tissue. Small spiders have spun webs between several stalks, and the mist has decorated these webs with droplets so numerous that each one looks like a tiny pearl necklace strung across an open door. You are careful not to touch any web as you push on, lifting the pole with a slow vertical motion that keeps it from sweeping sideways. The boat inches forward, the bow pressing into a cushion of duckweed that has gathered in this dead end, a bright green carpet of tiny overlapping leaves that parts without sound. When you emerge from the inlet, the mist has thinned enough for you to see a long stretch of the pond, and you notice the heron that stands motionless in the shallows 100 yards away. The heron is perfectly grey, a shape of stillness, its beak pointed at the water, its long legs as thin as the reeds themselves. You have seen this same bird many mornings, and you know that it will not move until it decides to strike, a burst of action that you will watch with the same calm detachment you bring to everything on the water. For now, the heron is just another part of the reeds, a living stalk among the dead ones, and you turn your attention back to the nearer vegetation. The topmost plumes of the reeds are now catching the first direct light, a wash of pale gold that turns the brown fluff into a smoky amber color. The mist, where the light touches it, becomes visible as tiny floating droplets, a haze of suspended water that moves in slow swirls as the air shifts. You feel the slight warmth on your shoulders, a welcome change from the earlier chill, and you know that soon the mist will burn off entirely and the pond will become a different place, open and bright. But for now you remain in the in-between time, and the reeds are still half-veiled, still mysterious. You pause to take a sip of water from your clay bottle, the liquid cool and tasteless on your tongue, and you watch a single reed leaf sway in a tiny eddy of air. The leaf is long, sharply pointed, and its edges are microscopically rough, a feature that you can feel but not see. Along its midrib, a line of dewdrops trembles, and as the leaf moves, one drop runs the full length and falls onto your sleeve, a tiny dark spot that spreads into the wool. You do not brush it away, it is just water. The same water that fills the pond and feeds the reeds, and collects on your pole and drips from your hat. Everything is connected by this water, and you are part of that connection. The small unseen birds hidden deep in the reed bed are beginning to stir more actively now, their chirps growing into a scattered chorus that still feels muted by the fog. They are probably reed warblers, little brown birds that weave their nests around 3 or 4 reed stems and raise their young in the thickest cover. You have found these nests before, tiny cups of woven grass, while cutting a channel in late summer, and you have always steered clear of them afterwards. The birds are safe here, in this place where no one hunts and no one comes but you. Their song is not loud, just a series of soft chattering notes that blend with the rustle of leaves and the lap of water, making a kind of music that is the opposite of a tune, a music that is simply the sound of presence. You push on again, the pole finding a patch of firmer bottom where the reed rhizomes have not yet spread, a rare sandy spot where the water feels thinner and clearer. The pole makes a soft grinding sound as it touches the sand, and you use that firmer purchase to send the boat in a wider arc around a thicket of young reeds that have grown up in the middle of the channel. These are the children of the main stand, new shoots that sprouted from a drifting piece of rhizome and are now trying to claim new territory. They are still slender, their stems are bright apple green, their plumes small and tight. You note their location so that you can return with the sickle if they eventually threaten the passage. But that decision is weeks or months away, and you store it without urgency. As you complete your arc, the boat enters another long corridor of mature reeds, and you let the momentum carry you while you rest the pole across the gunwales once more. Standing still, you feel the boat's gentle rocking as it settles, the water's rhythm as natural and calming as breathing. You watch the reeds passing on either side, each stalk a tall, quiet individual, and yet all of them part of the same great organism that lines the pond. The brown plumes overhead weave together into a broken canopy, and the light that filters through them is soft and green-tinged, as if you were under a ceiling of the thinnest silk. The air here smells of fresh water and fresh leaves, and the only sound is the slow drip of mist from every surface, a sound so continuous that it becomes a silence of its own. You let the boat drift until it gently nudges a cluster of stems, and the rustle is so soft it barely registers. Then you lift the pole, find the bottom with a familiar smooth motion, and push again, the boat resuming its silent journey through the reeds. The morning continues, and so do you, a slow-moving figure in a world made of green stalks, grey water, and golden mist. Your work, nothing more than this quiet passing, this endless easy observation of the pond's oldest tenants. The reeds will be here tomorrow and the day after, and so will you, and the thought brings no urgency, only a deep, unspoken contentment that settles into your bones like the mist settles into the hollows of the land. You lower the ash pole into the water once more, and the tip sinks through the cool darkness until it touches the bottom, sending a soft tremor up the shaft and into your palms. What the pole finds down there, in the quiet world beneath the hull, is a layered record of everything that has happened in this pond since long before you were born. The first touch is always the uppermost sediment, a loose brown flock of decayed leaves and algae, and the fine silt that settles out of still water day after day. This layer is soft and yielding, so soft that the pole slips into it with almost no resistance, and you feel it as a slight thickening of the water rather than a true impact. The sensation is gentle, a muffled landing, and when you push, the pole slides sideways through this flock with a smooth, buttery motion that moves the boat forward in a silent glide. After that first inch, the pole reaches the next layer, which is darker and denser, a mixture of older leaf litter and the digested waste of the carp that have lived here for decades. This material is not unpleasant. It is simply the end product of the pond's endless cycle of eating and growing and returning to the earth. The carp feed on water plants and insects, and the small crustaceans that hide in the reeds, and what they excrete settles gently to the bottom, a fine dark rain that builds up over the years into a nutrient-rich mud. When the pole touches this layer, you feel a slight suction, a soft grip that holds the shaft for a fraction of a second before you lift it free. The mud clings to the ash and darkens its tip, and when you pull the pole clear, the water drips away more slowly than it does from bare wood, leaving a faint brown stain that will wash off with the next stroke. Below the carp waist lies the true pond bottom, the original clay that the estate's labourers dug and compacted more than a century ago when they dammed the little stream and shaped this basin. This clay is a grey-blue colour, dense and firm, so smooth that the pole's tip skids across it with a faint, slippery feeling. You know this clay well, because you have touched it with the pole 1,000 times, and you can distinguish its texture from everything else that lies over it. When the pole finds the clay, you feel a solid resistance that allows you to plant the shaft and push strongly, sending the boat forward with more purpose. But you rarely push that hard. Speed is not your aim. Instead, you let the pole barely kiss the clay before lifting, so that the boat moves with a minimum of disturbance. Between the boat's keel and these layers of sediment and clay, the water column itself varies in clarity and temperature, and the pole passes through these variations invisibly. You can feel the water's coolness through the wood, the way the shaft seems to grow heavier when it sinks into the deeper parts, and lighter when you cross a shallow shelf. The pond is not uniform. It has hills and valleys under the surface, submerged contours that you have learned to read with the pole as a blind man reads a page with his fingers. There is, for instance, a slight rise near the middle of the pond where a gravel shoal was laid down long ago to give the carp a spawning place. When you drift over that spot, the pole touches a gritty, shifting surface that makes a soft grinding sound against the ash, a sound that travels up the shaft and into your hands as a fine vibration. You pause there sometimes, leaning on the pole, feeling the tiny pebbles roll under the tip, and you imagine the carp fanning their tails over this gravel in the warm shallows of spring. Further along your route, you approach the area where a small feeder stream enters the pond, though the stream itself is now just a damp gully in late summer. The inlet has built up a fan of silt over the centuries, a soft delta that slopes gently into the deeper water. The pole tells you when you reach this place by sinking much deeper than before, the shaft plunging into loose sediment that offers no bottom for a long moment until it finally finds the clay far below. The feeling here is of pushing through something almost liquid, a thick soup of organic matter that has not yet compacted. Your pole hand feels the sudden lack of resistance and instinctively stops pushing, allowing the boat to coast over the deep spot with only the lightest guidance. The mist, still hanging low over the water, seems thicker near the inlet, as if the cooler air from the stream's memory still pools here, and your breath comes out in a faint cloud that mingles with the general grey. When you lift the pole after passing the inlet, the water runs down the shaft in a thin, continuous stream, dark with suspended silt that clouds the surface for a few seconds before settling back into invisibility. The pond repairs its own clarity quickly, and you watch the silt settle with the same patience you bring to everything. A tiny bubble of swamp gas rises from the spot where the pole plunged, reaching the surface with a soft plop, carrying with it a faint, marshy smell that dissipates almost at once. The carp avoid this deep, soft area, preferring the firmer bottoms where they can grub for food without sinking into the mire. And you note their absence as a blankness in the water, a place where no dark shapes move. Your work with the pole is a form of reading, a slow interpretation of the pond's hidden geography. You have no charts, no maps, only the memory in your hands and the subtle messages that travel up the ash grain. The pole is an extension of your own nerves, and you feel through it the difference between sand and clay, between fresh leaf litter and old, between a clean bottom and one fouled with fallen branches. Once, many years ago, you felt the pole strike something hard and unyielding, and after probing you discovered a lost stone from the old manor wall, tumbled into the water during a long-ago storm. You left it there, and now you know exactly where it lies, a submerged landmark that you pass every few days. When the pole taps it today, you feel the solid clunk through the wood, a brief, dull note that sounds once and is gone, and you file the location away in your mind without conscious thought. Occasionally, you lift the pole entirely and let the boat drift, and during these pauses, the pole rests across the gunwales while the water drips from its tip into the pond. Each drop makes a tiny ringing sound, a plink that seems to hang in the mist before fading. You stand still, your weight balanced, and you listen to the pond's other sounds, the ones that the poling sometimes covers. There is the gentle lapping of wavelets against the hull, so small they are barely ripples, created by the boat's own passage, and now dying away. There is the sound of a fish breaking the surface somewhere out in the mist, a soft kiss of water that leaves a spreading circle you cannot see. There is the distant murmur of the rooks that you heard earlier, now a little louder as the day slowly wakes the estate. When you drift, the boat turns gradually on its own axis, a slow rotation that the pole would normally correct. You let it turn because you trust the water to carry you harmlessly, and because the changing view reveals new details of the reed wall and the mist beyond. The boat's flat bottom skims silently, leaving no wake, and the motion is so smooth that you feel as if you are floating in air rather than water. The mist is definitely thinner now, and through a long gap in the reeds you can see the faint outline of the old willow on the far bank, its drooping branches a ghostly grey-green against the lighter grey of the sky. The willow is a marker you use often, a familiar shape that tells you exactly where you are in the pond's geography, and you note its appearance without excitement, as simply another fact of the morning. When the boat's rotation brings the bow back toward the channel you were following, you pick up the pole again and resume your work. The next stretch of bottom is one of your favorite parts, a submerged path that runs along the northern edge where the estate's builders laid a gravel walkway before the pond was dug. The gravel is still there, buried under a thin layer of silt, but still firm, and the pole's tip crunches softly as it finds the stones. Each push along this path sends a gentle, grinding sensation through the shaft, a texture that is almost musical in its consistency, a hushed crunch that keeps a slow rhythm with your breathing. The water here is shallower, the pole meeting the bottom at a more acute angle, and you adjust your grip accordingly, sliding your hands lower to compensate for the shorter stroke. The gravel path runs straight for about 40 yards, and as you follow it, the pole occasionally dislodges a small stone that rolls away with a dull thud. The carp seem to appreciate this gravelly area, because you often see their dark shapes hovering just above the stones, their tails barely moving. A large one passes directly under the boat now, a shadow that is almost black, and you feel a slight bump as the pole inadvertently touches its back. The carp shies away with a powerful swirl, the water boiling for a moment, and then the surface settles back to glass. You feel a brief, wordless apology that the fish has already forgotten, already returned to its slow patrol of the bottom. Beyond the gravel path, the bottom changes again, becoming a patch of pure clay that the reeds have not yet colonized. This clay is firm and smooth, and the pole slides across it with a slick, almost oily feeling. When you lift the pole, it comes up clean, the water sheeting off quickly, leaving the ash pale and wet. The clarity of the water in this section is remarkable, and when you look down, you can see the clay bottom a few feet below, marked with the sinuous trails of freshwater mussels that have plowed through the surface film. The mussels themselves are buried, only their siphons showing as tiny holes, and you pass over them without disturbing anything. The light continues to change, the mist now mere tatters that drift across the water in low banks. The rising sun has yet to break through the tree line, but the sky is a pale yellow-white that promises a clear morning. In this brighter air, you can see more of the pond than you could an hour ago, and the world expands from the small circle of reeds and mist to a wider view that includes the dark line of the elders and the pale stone of the manor house chimney through the distant trees. But you keep your focus on the pole and the bottom, because that is where the immediate work lies. The pole finds a patch of sand near the overflow channel, a clean, bright sand that must have washed in from the stream during a flood many years ago. The sand squeaks softly against the ash, a sound so high and faint that it is almost beyond hearing, but you feel it as a fine vibration in your knuckles. The overflow channel itself is a simple sluice gate set in the dam wall, a wooden board that you check each morning to ensure the water level stays constant. Today you guide the boat toward it, poling through a narrow gap in the reeds, and you see that the water is flowing gently over the board in a thin, clear sheet, a sign that the pond is full and the stream is still feeding it slightly. You do not need to adjust anything. so you let the boat drift near the sluice for a moment while you listen to the quiet trickle of the overflow, a sound like a very distant conversation. The water that escapes here will find its way down a grassy runnel and into the next valley, eventually joining a river and then the sea. But you do not think about that long journey. You think only of the sound and the way it mixes with the dripping of the pole and the distant rooks. After the overflow, you push the boat back into the main channel and continue your slow circuit. The bottom here is a mixture of all the things you have felt before. Sand near the edges, silt in the deeper parts, the occasional tangle of dead roots from a tree that fell into the pond decades ago and slowly rotted away. The pole probes each variation and sends its report up to your hands, and your hands understand without any need for words. The sun is now touching the topmost branches of the alders, and a slanting beam of light breaks through the reeds and falls onto the water just ahead of the boat, turning the surface into a sheet of polished bronze. The pole enters this lit area and emerges with glittering droplets, and you feel the slight warmth of the sun on your hands for the first time this morning. A sudden soft thump against the hull makes you look down, and you see a small branch, a broken reed stem actually, that has floated free and is now drifting alongside the boat. You push it away with the tip of the pole, and it spins off into the reeds, where it will eventually waterlog and sink, adding its small contribution to the layers on the bottom. Everything that falls into the pond eventually becomes part of the bottom, and the bottom remembers everything. Your pole has read that memory for years, and you have become the keeper of that knowledge, the one who knows where the gravel lies and where the clay is thin, where the carp sleep in winter, and where the lilies will bloom in summer. You decide to make one more long traverse across the open water before turning back toward the landing stage. The mist is almost gone now, just a few drifting wisps near the willow, and the pond lies before you in all its quiet expanse. You plant the pole in the clay and push with a long, easy stroke, the boat surging forward with a smooth hiss of water along the hull. The pole arcs through the air, shedding droplets, and you lower it again, find the bottom, push again. The rhythm of this open water poling is steady and unbroken, the depth more uniform, the resistance consistent, and your body falls into the work with the ease of long practice. The old willow on the far bank is now fully visible, its bark deeply furrowed, its trailing branches motionless in the still air, and it watches your approach with the patience of a thing that has stood for 100 years. As you draw nearer to the willow, the bottom begins to rise and the pole meets the tangle of roots that spread outward from the trunk under the water. These roots are hard and smooth, polished by the currentless water, and the pole's tip skitters over them with a series of light tapping sensations. You steer around the largest roots, guiding the boat through a maze that you know by heart, and soon you're in the shade of the willow canopy. The temperature drops by a degree, and the light turns green and dim, and the air smells of willow bark, a faintly medicinal, clean scent. You pause here, the boat nestled among the hanging branches, and you let the pole rest while you take in the quiet of this sheltered space. The carp like the willow roots as well, and you see several dark shapes hovering motionless in the deeper shade. One of them is a very large mirror carp, its scales irregular patches of gold on a dark back, and you recognize it as a fish that has been in its pond since before you took over the bailiff's duties. It drifts without moving a fin, suspended in the green water like a living stone, and you watch it for a long minute before it slowly fades back into the shadows. The pole drips, the willow leaves drip, a tiny wren flits through the branches above your head and is gone, and the silence that follows is so deep you can almost hear the sun warming the wood of the boat. Eventually you take up the pole again and back the boat out of the willow's embrace, pivoting with a careful push, then turning toward the distant reed channel that leads to your landing stage. The return journey will take you back over the same bottom you have traveled this morning, the same layers of silt and clay and sand, the same hidden landmarks. You will read them again with the pole, and they will tell you the same story they always tell, a story without words, a story that continues without beginning or end, under the quiet water, under the quiet sky. The pond where you now pole your flat-bottomed boat came into being more than 100 years before you were born, in a time that your grandfather remembered well and spoke of only rarely, in brief sentences that were themselves as calm as the water. The land here was once a narrow valley, a gentle fold between two low hills, with a small stream running along its lowest point, a stream that was no wider than a man could step across. In wet winters, the stream would overflow and turn the valley floor into a marsh of sedge and rushes, and in dry summers it shrank to a trickle that barely wet the stones. The nobleman who owned the estate in those days, a great-grandfather of the current lord, looked at this marshy ground and saw the possibility of a carp pond, a thing of both use and beauty that would supply the manor table and reflect the sky in its still surface. The decision was made without hurry, as all decisions on the estate were made, and the work began in a spring season when the ground was soft but not sodden. Labourers from the village and the surrounding farms were brought to the site, men who knew how to dig clay and build dams, and they worked through the lengthening days with spades and barrows and woven baskets for carrying earth. Your grandfather was among them, a young man then, strong in the back and patient in the hands, and he told your father, who told you, that the first task was to mark out the shape of the pond with wooden stakes driven into the mud. The shape was not a perfect oval, but a long, irregular curve that followed the natural contours of the valley, widest where the stream spread out and narrower at the ends, so that the finished pond would hold the water as naturally as a cupped palm holds rain. The digging began at the shallow end, near the spot where the dam would later be built, and the men worked their way upstream, peeling back the layer of black marsh soil to expose the yellow clay beneath. This clay was the foundation of the whole enterprise, a dense, sticky material that water could not easily pass through, and the men handled it with care, setting it aside in heaps that they would later puddle into a waterproof lining. The spades cut into the ground with a rhythmic, wet sound, a sound that your grandfather said could be heard across the valley on still days, a steady chuff, chuff, chuff that marked the slow progress of the work. The removed earth was piled onto a bank that would become the outer rim of the pond, and this bank was planted later with alder and willow saplings whose descendants now overhang the water you pole each morning. When the basin was deep enough in most places, the men turned to the laborious process of puddling the clay, a task that required them to tread the sticky material with their bare feet, working it until it became a homogeneous, impermeable paste. They added water from the stream, a little at a time, and walked back and forth over the clay for hours, their legs growing tired and their skin stained a pale yellow that took days to wash off. The puddled clay was then pressed into the bottom and sides of the basin, laid on in thick layers that were smoothed with wooden floats, and the men took great care to seal every crack and join, for a single flaw would let the water seep away and undo the work of months. Your grandfather remembered the smell of that wet clay, a clean, mineral smell like a riverbank after rain, and he remembered the way it suckled at his feet and made a soft, squelching music that was the soundtrack of that whole spring. Once the basin was sealed, the men built the dam across the lower end of the valley, a broad earthwork faced with stone on the waterside and packed with a core of puddled clay that would hold the stream in check. A sluice gate was set into the dam's center, a simple arrangement of oak boards that could be raised or lowered to control the water level, and a stone overflow channel was cut around one end to carry away the surplus in times of flood. The stream, which had flowed freely for centuries, now found its way blocked by this new wall of earth and stone, and it began to spread across the basin, rising slowly day by day as the spring rains added their contribution. Your grandfather watched the water creep across the clay, covering the footprints of the workers, submerging first the lower reeds that had already begun to grow, then rising higher until it lapped at the base of the dam and began to trickle through the still open sluice into the old channel beyond. The pond was alive. The reeds that now lined the pond were not left to chance. They were brought as young plants from another, older pond on a neighboring estate, dug up with their roots carefully wrapped in damp sacking and carried in a cart through the lanes. The men planted them in the shallows, pushing the root balls into the soft clay and pressing the mud around them with gentle, patient hands. For the first season, the reeds looked thin and uncertain, their green shoots barely rising above the water, but the mud was rich with the nutrients of the flooded valley, and the plants quickly sent out their white rhizomes into the new territory. By the second summer they had thickened into a fringe along the edges, and by the fifth they formed the dense stands that you now navigate with your pole, their plumes rustling in the slightest breeze and their roots binding the shoreline into a stable, living mat. The carp came next. the true purpose of all this labor. They were common carp, Saprinus carpio, a fish that had been kept in stew ponds across England since the medieval monks first brought them from the continent. The nobleman's steward arranged for a cartload of fingerlings to be transported from a distant monastery pond. Tiny fish that were only the length of a man's little finger. Their scales are pale bronze and their bodies so delicate that the journey had to be made slowly, with frequent stops to refresh the water in their barrels. When the barrels were tipped into the new pond, the fingerlings darted away into the murky depths and were not seen again for weeks, and the nobleman's household wondered if they had perished. But they had only found the deepest holes, where they lay still and fed on the tiny creatures that were already colonizing the water, and by autumn they had grown fat and bold, rising to the surface at dusk to snap at falling insects. The nobleman and his family did not often visit the pond in those early years, at least not in a way that left a mark on the records, but they valued it as a quiet asset. Occasionally, on a warm summer evening, the lord would walk down from the manor house with his wife and children, and they would stand on the bank and watch the carp rise, their rings spreading across the still water. Sometimes the steward would order a few fish to be netted for a feast, and the men would draw a seine net carefully through the shallows, taking only what was needed and returning the rest gently to the water. The carp that were taken were thick-bodied and golden-scaled, their flesh firm and sweet from the clean pond water, and they were carried to the manor kitchen wrapped in wet reeds to keep them fresh. Your grandfather helped with that first netting, wading into the cold water with the net draped over his arm, and he recalled the weight of the fish as they thumped against his legs, a solid, living weight that pleased him. After the pond was established, the need for a water bailiff arose, a person whose duty was to watch over the pond and its fish, to cut the reeds when they grew too thick, to clear the sluice of debris after storms, and to ensure that no one poached the carp under cover of darkness. The nobleman chose your grandfather for this role, knowing him as a careful and quiet man who moved through the world without disturbance. For the rest of his working life, your grandfather poled a flat-bottomed boat much like the one you now stand in, built to the same design by the same boatwright's family in the village. The pole he used was cut from the same ash copse that supplies your own, and he stored it in the same small reed-thatched shed by the landing stage. He kept the pond in good order through the slow passage of decades, through mild winters when the ice barely skimmed the edges, and hard winters when the whole surface froze for weeks, and he had to break breathing holes for the carp with a heavy mallet. He repaired the sluice boards when they swelled or cracked, and he cleared the overflow channel of fallen leaves each autumn, working with the same steady rhythm that you now bring to your own tasks. When your grandfather grew too old to pole the boat, the duty passed to your father, who had been learning the pond secrets since he was a boy. Your father poled the pond through a different era, a time of some quiet changes on the estate. The old manor house was partly rebuilt with new stone. The parkland was landscaped with a smooth sweep of lawn, and the kitchen gardens were enlarged to supply a growing household. But the pond remained as it had always been, a still center in a changing world, and your father treated it with the same respect his father had shown. He watched the same carp grow large and slow, their scales darkening with age, their tails fanning the water as they drifted over the gravel shoals. He saw the reeds thicken, and then thin again in a natural cycle, and he cut new channels when the old ones closed, using a sickle that your grandfather had sharpened 100 times, and that now hangs in the shed, its blade worn to a crescent moon of bright steel. The annual netting continued as a quiet tradition, usually in the early autumn, when the kitchen needed fresh stores, and your father would assist the estate workers as they drew the net through the deep part of the pond. The carp that were taken were always the younger ones, the fish of 2 or 3 years, leaving the great old ones to glide on undisturbed. Your father told you that the largest carp, the one with the irregular mirror scales that you saw this morning under the willow, was already in the pond when he was a young man, and it is still there now, a fish of remarkable age and dignity. It has seen 3 generations of water bailiffs, and it may see more. The pond's history is not one of dramatic events, but of slow accumulations, the same kind of layering that you feel through your pole each morning. The sediment on the bottom deepens year by year, building up from the leaves that fall and the carp's gentle foraging, and the clay underneath remains firm and true. The reeds advance and retreat in a cycle that spans decades, their rhizomes creeping outward into open water or dying back where the shade is too deep. The dam holds the water as it has held it for over a century, the puddled clay core still sealed, the stone facing still sound, needing only minor repairs after the heaviest rains. The overflow channel still carries away the excess, and the water that spills over the sluice port still finds its way down the grassy runnel into the next valley, just as it did when your grandfather first watched it flow. The nobleman's family has come and gone through the generations, their portraits hanging in the manor house gallery. They have married and had children, and passed the estate down through the careful legal structures of inheritance. But to the pond, they are only faint presences, occasional figures who walk down the slope on a summer evening, or who send a servant to request a carp for the table. They have never interfered with the pond's quiet life, sensing perhaps that it runs best when left alone, and your own family has served them silently across the years, a service that consists mostly of being present, of watching, of poling the same boat through the same reeds while the mist rises and falls with the seasons. You are the third bailiff of your family, and you carry the memory of your father and your grandfather with you whenever you pick up the pole. The pole itself is the same ash pole that your father used, though you replaced it once, a decade ago, when the old one finally split. The boat was built for your father by the boatwright's son, and it is identical to the one your grandfather poled. The same flat bottom and oak ribs, the same iron oarlock worn smooth, the same smell of tar and damp wood. The shed where you store the pole and the sickle and the spare sluice boards is the same shed your grandfather built. Its reed-thatched roof renewed every few years, but its timbers still the originals, grey and solid. The continuity is a comfort, a quiet thread that runs through the years, and when you are on the water in the early morning, you sometimes feel that they are there with you, not as ghosts, but as a settling of the air, a stillness that holds the weight of all those past mornings. The seasons pass over the pond in a steady round, and each one brings its own small tasks. In winter, you check the ice and clear the sluice of frost. In spring, you watch for the bright green of new reed shoots and listen for the splash of carp spawning in the shallows. In summer, you trim the channels and note the water level, which drops slowly through the hot months. In autumn, the leaves fall and the mist thickens, and you prepare the netting if the kitchen requires it. Each task is a link to the past, a repetition of something your father and grandfather did before you, and you perform them with the same unhurried care, as if the pond itself has taught you its own pace. The pond has seen wars and plagues and changes of government, but none of those things have touched its surface. The carp have fed and spawned and grown old in the same quiet water, their bronze shapes passing through the green light as they have always done. The reeds have rustled in the same breeze, the mist has risen in the same ghostly banks, and the boat has creaked in the same gentle rhythm generation after generation. The world beyond the alders may be noisy with change, but here, inside the ring of reeds and willows, time moves at the speed of dripping water and drifting clouds, and the story of the pond is the story of a held breath. A pause that has lasted 100 years and will last 100 more if the reeds and the carp and the careful hands of the bailiffs are allowed to continue their quiet work. As your boat drifts into a patch of open water where the reeds draw back and the mist has nearly vanished, you begin to notice the carp more clearly than at any other point in the morning. The surface of the pond, now touched by the full soft light of the risen sun, has turned from dark pewter to a deep brown green, and in that clearer water, the dark shapes of the fish are visible as slow-moving shadows that seem to hang between the bottom and the sky. The common carp, Cyprinus carpio, is a fish of ancient lineage, and the ones in this pond are the direct descendants of the fingerlings that were tipped from barrels more than a century ago. Their bloodlines mixing and settling into a stable population that needs no stocking or culling, only the quiet oversight that you provide. They glide beneath the boat now with a calm that matches your own, their bodies built for stillness as much as movement, their fins fanning the water with a rhythm that is almost too slow to perceive. You rest the pole across the gunwales and let the boat drift to a near halt, giving yourself over entirely to watching the fish. The largest among them is the old mirror carp you saw earlier under the willow, a fish of remarkable size whose back is a dark olive bronze, and whose flanks are scattered with large irregular scales that catch the light like flakes of tarnished gold. Each scale is a world in miniature, ringed with concentric growth lines that record the fish's age, the tight bands of slow winters alternating with the wider bands of abundant summers. This carp is old enough that its scales have become thick and slightly raised at the edges, giving it a rough, armored appearance that contrasts with the smooth, fully scaled common carp that swim nearby. The mirror carp's belly is a pale cream, its pectoral fins a soft orange, and as it passes under the boat, you see the steady pulsing of its gill covers, that constant, gentle breathing that has sustained it through decades of quiet pond life. The other carp in the pond are mostly fully scaled commons, their bodies covered from head to tail in overlapping rows of bronze-tinted scales that form a pattern as regular as roof tiles. These fish are smaller than the old mirror, but still substantial creatures, 2 or 3 feet long and thick through the shoulders, their backs a shade of olive that darkens toward the spine and lightens toward the belly. Their tails are deeply forked, a rich reddish brown that becomes almost translucent at the trailing edges, and when they flick their tails to turn, the water swirls in a brief, silent eddy that catches the light and then fades. You have come to recognize certain individuals by subtle markings, a pale patch behind the gill, a slightly crooked ray in the dorsal fin, a scar from a heron's strike that healed into a silver line. None of them has a name, but you know them as you know the landmarks on the bottom. The carp's behavior in these early hours is slow and deliberate, shaped by the cool temperature of the water and the lingering memory of night. They hover just above the bottom, their pectoral fins making tiny adjustments to keep them stationary, their mouths opening and closing in a steady rhythm that draws water over their gills. Occasionally one of them tilts downward, rooting in the soft sediment with its snout, and a puff of fine silt rises like smoke before settling back. You can see the round, sucker-like shape of the carp's mouth when it does this, a mouth designed for grubbing among mud and plants, and you know that it is searching for the small creatures that live in the bottom ooze, bloodworms that are the larvae of midges, tiny freshwater shrimps, and the soft snail shells that crunch faintly before being swallowed. The carp does this without hurry, moving a few inches, pausing, then moving again, as if the search itself is a form of rest. Every so often, a carp rises toward the surface, its body tilting upward at a shallow angle, and you see its snout break the water with the faintest of kisses, taking in a floating insect or simply sampling the surface film. The ring that spreads from this rise is perfectly circular, expanding outward inch by inch until it bumps against a reed stem or fades into the general stillness. The sound of the rise is a soft plip, a single note that hangs in the quiet air for a moment and then is gone, and if you close your eyes you could almost count the seconds between rises across the whole pond. The carp do this more often as the water warms, and by midday they will be actively cruising just under the surface. But for now, these rises are few and far between, each one a small event in the slow morning. The carp's preference for warm shallows is something you have observed across many seasons. As the sun climbs higher, the shallow ends of the pond, where the water is only a few feet deep and the sun can reach the bottom, will draw the fish like a slowly gathering magnet. They will move into those areas and hover with their backs barely submerged, the dorsal fins cutting the surface like a row of tiny sails, and they will absorb the warmth through their dark skin, their metabolisms quickening by imperceptible degrees. In winter, the opposite happens. The carp sink into the deepest parts of the pond, where the water stays just above freezing, and they rest there in a state of semi-torpor, their fins barely twitching, their breathing so slow that a human observer might think them dead. But they survive every winter, emerging in spring leaner but alive, their bodies retuned to the business of feeding and spawning. The spawning itself is one of the few times when the carp abandon their usual quiet. In late spring, when the water temperature stays above a certain warmth for several days, the fish gather over the gravel shoals in the shallows and begin their hectic courtship. The males chase the females, their bodies splashing and rolling, the water churned into a froth, and the sound of their thrashing can be heard from the bank. You've watched this from the boat many times, drifting at a distance so as not to disturb them. The females release their eggs in adhesive strands that stick to the gravel and the reed stems, and the males follow with clouds of milt that turn the water briefly milky. After a few days, the spawning ends. The carp retreat to their usual haunts and a new generation begins its life as tiny, transparent larvae that will grow slowly, hidden among the reeds. But that is a memory for another season. On this morning the carp are calm, their spawning months past, their bodies sleek with summer growth. The diet of the carp is as varied as the pond itself. They eat the soft tips of water plants, nibbling at the pondweed that grows in the shallows. They eat insects that fall onto the surface, their mouths emerging with a soft slurp. They eat the crustaceans and mollusks that live in the mud, grinding the hard shells with the pharyngeal teeth in their throats. You sometimes find the evidence of this grinding on the bank, small fragments of snail shell that have passed through the fish and been deposited in their waste. The carp's role in the pond is that of a gentle gardener, turning over the bottom sediment, keeping the water from becoming too stagnant, trimming the underwater vegetation so that it does not choke the open channels. They are not destructive in the way that some carp can be in a small pond. Here, in this large body of water, they are in balance with the plants and the insects and the birds, each one a part of the slow cycle. As you stand in the boat and watch, a group of 5 carp swims in a loose formation around the bow, their bodies aligned as if by silent agreement. They move with a synchronized grace, rising and falling in the water column, their tails sweeping in unison when they turn. The light that now fills the pond strikes their scales at different angles, and each fish becomes a moving mosaic of bronze, gold, and olive, the colors shifting as they pass from shadow into sun. One of them, a particularly pale common carp with a golden flush in its cheeks, turns sideways to the boat, and you see the full disc of its body, a broad oval that speaks of many years of easy feeding. Its eye is a dark, glassy sphere set in a ring of paler skin, and it regards the boat with no sign of fear, for these fish have never known a predator more dangerous than a heron, and even the heron takes only the smallest ones. The boat continues its slow drift, and the carp continue their patrol. You notice a smaller fish, perhaps a 2-year-old, dart suddenly to the side to catch a water boatman that has skimmed too close to the surface. The capture is fast, a brief sideways lunge that breaks the surface film, and then the carp resumes its steady cruising as if nothing has happened. The ripples from that lunge travel outward and intersect with the ripples from a distant coot, creating a delicate pattern of overlapping rings that the sun turns into a net of gold. The carp do not react to these intersections. They swim on in their silent world, their lateral lines sensing every vibration, their small brains processing the constant data of the water. You watch the mirror carp again as it settles near the bottom, just ahead of the boat, its body coming to rest on the soft sediment in a way that dimples the surface. It stays there for a long minute, its gills working gently, and then it shifts slightly, disturbing a puff of silt that rises in a slow brown cloud. As the silt settles, you see that the fish has uncovered a patch of the underlying gravel, and you can make out the individual pebbles, each one rounded by centuries of water. The carp nuzzles among them, its mouth working, and you know it is picking out the tiny larvae that hide between the stones. The sight of this ancient fish, methodically feeding on the bottom, is a reminder of how the pond has functioned for so long. The carp tend the gravel, the reeds filter the water, the bailiff tends the hole, and the cycle turns without end. The sunlight is now strong enough that you can see your own shadow on the bottom when you lean over the side, a dark shape that moves with the boat's rocking. The carp react to this shadow with a slight deepening of their swimming, sliding a few inches lower in the water, but they do not flee. They have learned over generations that the shadow of the bailiff's boat is a neutral thing, neither threat nor food, and they accept it as they accept the shadow of a cloud. Your own face looks back at you from the surface, a wavering reflection that breaks apart when a carp rises nearby, and then the reflection reforms, as patient as the pond itself. One of the most remarkable qualities of the carp is their longevity. A common carp in a well-kept pond can live for 50 years or more, and you have heard tales of fish that reached a century in the stew ponds of great monasteries. The mirror carp under your boat is certainly older than you, perhaps by a decade or more, and it has seen the pond through deaths and births and the slow shifting of the seasons. Its body carries the memory of every winter's cold, every summer's warmth, every spawning season's urgency, and it has survived them all with the same quiet persistence. When it dies, it will sink to the bottom and slowly return to the sediment, its calcium-rich bones dissolving into the water, its scales settling into the mud, and the pond will absorb it as it absorbs everything. But that day is not yet, and for now the fish is still here, still gliding, still breathing. The soundscape of the carp's world is one of near silence, but if you listen very closely you can hear the occasional faint click or grunt that the fish produce with their pharyngeal teeth or their swim bladders. These sounds are below the threshold of casual hearing, and you've only caught them on the stillest of days when your ears are tuned to the water. They are not songs, they are simply the noises of digestion and movement, the quiet machinery of a living body. The carp also communicate through subtle shifts of posture and the release of chemical signals that you cannot perceive, a silent language that organizes their schools and warns of danger. As you watch them now, you see a sudden synchronized turn among the group near the bow, a motion that has no visible cause, and you wonder what signal passed between them, as silent as a thought. You decide to resume your poling, but you do so with extra care, easing the pole into the water at a shallow angle so that it enters without a splash. The carp near the boat drift aside, their bodies bending in a smooth curve, and then they reassemble behind you once you have passed. Pushed by the gentlest of strokes, the boat slides over a group of smaller carp that are feeding on algae growing on a fallen branch. They scatter in a brief flicker of bronze, then settle back before you have gone 10 feet. The pole touches the bottom and lifts, and the rhythm of your movement blends with the rhythm of the fish, human and carp sharing the same quiet water, each pursuing its own slow purpose. The old mirror carp follows the boat for a short distance, its large body gliding just under the surface, and you feel a small, private pleasure at its company. It has done this before on other mornings, and you have come to think of it as a kind of recognition, not of you as an individual, but of the boat as a familiar feature of its world. The fish turns aside when you reach the edge of the reed bed, disappearing into the green shadows of the stems, and you watch its dark shape merge with the darkness of the underwater roots. The pond feels a little emptier without it, but you know it is only a few yards away, resting in the cool, tannin-stained water under the reeds, waiting for the sun to climb higher before it ventures out again. The sun is now fully up, and the mist is entirely gone, leaving the pond in a state of perfect clarity. You can see the carp's world in all its detail, the waving fronds of pondweed, the dark hollows under the banks, the scattered shells of freshwater mussels, the pale threads of algae that sway in the slight current. The fish move through this landscape with a familiarity of old inhabitants, their bodies navigating obstacles that you cannot see. You think of your father, who used to say that the carp knew the pond better than any bailiff ever could, for they lived in its water and breathed its breath, and they had no need of poles or boats. You, on the other hand, are only a visitor, a respectful guest who is permitted to pass through, and you pole the boat with the quiet gratitude of someone who has been allowed to share this world for a few hours each morning. The boat drifts slowly toward the narrow eastern arm of the pond, and you steer it with a gentle pressure on the pole, guiding the flat bow through a gap in the reeds that only you ever use. This part of the morning is given over to the small methodical tasks that make up your role as water bailiff, duties so familiar that your hands perform them while your mind remains as calm as the water itself. The first of these tasks lies just ahead, the wattle screens that block the narrow channel where the old stream used to exit the pond, a series of woven panels that keep the carp from escaping into the overflow runnel during times of high water. These screens were built by your father, their upright stakes driven into the clay by his own hands, and you have maintained them every year since, replacing a cracked hazel withe here, tightening a lashing there. You bring the boat alongside the first screen and let it bump softly against a stake, the wood of the hull meeting the wood of the wattle with a quiet, hollow thud. The screen itself is a simple thing, a frame of split oak stakes with long, flexible hazel rods woven horizontally between them, the whole panel forming a lattice that lets water pass freely while stopping anything larger than a minnow. Moss and algae have grown on the submerged parts, turning the hazel a soft, furry green, and a few small freshwater snails are attached to the wood, their shells the color of old horn. You lean forward, your free hand steadying the boat against the nearest stake, and you examine each rod in turn, running your fingers over the hazel to feel for any split or weakness. The rods are cool and smooth under your touch, slick with the same green film that covers everything in the water, but they are all sound, none cracked by frost or gnawed by water voles. You untie the leather cord that holds the top corner of the screen to its support post, the knot coming loose with a familiar, easy pull, and you swing the panel open like a gate, letting it pivot on its lower lashings. The water on the other side is slightly darker, shaded by an overhanging alder, and you peer into it, checking for any accumulation of leaves or sticks that might block the flow. A few alder leaves have indeed gathered against the bottom of the frame, their brown shapes pressed flat by the gentle current, and you reach down with the pole's tip to tease them free. They drift away, spinning slowly, and the water runs clear and unimpeded. The carp do not gather here. They seem to know that this channel leads nowhere they want to go, and the screens have not been tested by any determined fish in all the years you have watched them. But the task is part of the routine, and you perform it with the same care every morning. You swing the screen back into place, settle it against the post, and retie the leather cord, pulling it snug, but not too tight, for a cord that is too tight will cut into the wood over time. The knot is a simple half hitch that your father taught you when your hands were still small, and you tie it now without looking, your fingers remembering the motions. The boat rocks gently as you push away from the screen, the pole finding the bottom and sending you further along the narrow channel toward the next panel, and then the next, each one checked in the same unhurried way. None of them needs repair today, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of a system in good order, a small structure doing its small job without fuss. From the wattle screens you guide the boat back into the main body of the pond and turn toward the overflow channel on the far side. This is a stone-lined cut that runs from the dam end of the pond, down through a grassy runnel and out into the lower pasture, and at its head sits the sluice gate that controls the water level. The morning light is now bright enough to cast crisp shadows, and the stonework of the overflow blows a warm grey in the sun. You approach it slowly, poling through a patch of lily pads whose round green leaves are beginning to cup upward and whose tight buds are still closed, the pale pink of the petals just visible. The lilies part around the bow with a soft, wet sound, and the boat slips into the clear water beyond. The sluice gate is a simple vertical board of oak, 1 inch thick and 2 feet wide, set into grooves cut in the stone sides of the channel. A wooden handle, worn dark by countless hands, is attached to the top by 2 iron bolts, and you can see the water line on the board, a faint stain that shows the pond is 1 inch below full. A thin sheet of water spills over the top, no thicker than a pane of glass, and it falls into the channel below with a quiet, steady murmur that sounds like a distant conversation. You set the pole down and lean over the bow, one hand on the sluice handle, and you test its movement, lifting it just a fraction to feel the weight of the water against it. The board slides smoothly in its grooves, well greased with the tallow you applied in the spring, and you lower it back into place with a gentle push, satisfied that the level is correct. Around the sluice, the stonework is thick, with a fine velvety moss that has grown there for decades, its color a deep emerald where the water keeps it wet, and a paler olive where it dries in the air. A few fronds of maidenhair fern have taken root in a crack between the stones, their delicate leaves trembling in the almost imperceptible breeze that stirs the morning, and you pause to look at them, noting their healthy color and the tiny black spores that dot their undersides. The overflow channel itself is clear, its stone bed swept clean by the constant flow, and no fallen branches or clumps of weed obstruct it. You make a mental note to clear the runnel lower down if the autumn rains bring debris, but for now, everything is as it should be. With the sluice checked, you sit down for the first time since leaving the landing stage. There is a small seat in the stern, a plank set across the gunwales, its surface polished by years of use, and you settle onto it with a quiet exhale, the wood creaking softly under your weight. The boat rocks gently from the shift of your body, and then it steadies, and you reach under the seat for the small leather bag that holds your morning bread and cheese. The bag is old leather, dark brown and supple, its drawstring pulling open with a soft hiss, and inside is a thick heel of yesterday's bread, its crust still faintly crisp, and a wedge of hard cheese wrapped in a clean linen cloth. You bring these out and set them on your knee, and you take your time with the simple meal. The bread tears apart under your fingers, revealing the soft pale crumb, and the cheese has a nutty scent that mixes with the clean air of the pond. You eat slowly, chewing each mouthful without hurry, and between bites you let your gaze rest on the water, the reeds, the alders on the far bank. A pair of mallards has appeared near the reed fringe, the drake's green head, glossy in the sun, and they paddle with quiet ripples, dabbing their bills at the surface. They do not approach the boat, and you do not disturb them, and the meal continues in a shared, wordless peace. The bread and cheese taste of the estate, of the wheat fields and the dairy, and you feel the strength of them settling into your body, a quiet warmth that will carry you through the rest of the morning. After the last mouthful, you brush the crumbs from your tunic and let them fall into the water, where tiny fish, perhaps young roach, rise to take them with quick, darting motions. The linen cloth is folded and returned to the bag, the cheese wrapped carefully for tomorrow, and the leather drawstring pulls closed. You reach for your clay bottle, which hangs from a peg under the seat, and you pull out its wooden stopper with a soft pop. The water inside is cool, drawn from the well near the estate's kitchen garden, and it tastes faintly of minerals and of the clay that lines the bottle, a clean, earthy flavor that washes the last crumbs from your mouth. You take 3 sips, pausing between each, and the coolness spreads down your throat and into your chest, a small, pleasant sensation that helps you settle deeper into the slow pace of the morning. The stopper is replaced, and the bottle returns to its peg, the faint clink of clay against wood, the only sound of its stowing. The meal done, you stand up again and adjust the boat's position with a single, easy push of the pole, turning the bow back toward the main channel. Before you resume the full routine, there is one more small task to attend to, the observation of water clarity. You keep no written records, for you cannot read or write beyond the simplest marks, but you hold the pond's condition in your memory with a precision that needs no ink. You lean over the side, your face close to the surface, and you look straight down into the water. The depth here is about 5 feet, and you can see the bottom clearly, the dark undulations of the sediment, the pale spots of gravel, the waving green strands of pondweed. The clarity is good, very good for this time of year, with the visibility extending down to the point where the pondweed fades into the deeper shadows. The water is not too clear, which would mean a lack of the tiny life that feeds the carp, nor too cloudy, which would signal a problem with the silt or the fish stirring the bottom excessively. It is in perfect balance, a healthy green-brown that lets the light penetrate, but still holds a pleasant mystery. You straighten up and reach for your hat, the wide-brimmed felt that has kept the mist off your hair, and you take it off for a moment to feel the full warmth of the sun. The brim is damp with the morning's moisture, and the felt has softened slightly, but it will dry soon in the strengthening light. You run your fingers through your hair, smoothing it back, and then you replace the hat, tugging it down just enough to shade your eyes. The sun is now above the tree line, a pale gold disk that is beginning to cast the first real heat of the day, and your tunic, which was cool and damp an hour ago, is starting to dry, the wool warming against your shoulders. The hat shadow falls across your face as you settle back into your poling stance, and the small adjustment brings a slight comfortable change in your perception. The world under the brim a little softer, a little more contained. You resume your slow circuit of the pond, but now your route takes you along the edge of the alder wood, where the bank rises gently and the roots of the trees are exposed, a tangle of dark wood clutching the earth. The water here is shallow and very clear, and you can see the bottom as if through glass, every pebble and fallen leaf distinct. A water vole has built its burrow in the bank, a hole just above the waterline with a small platform of cut reeds leading to it, and you see the animal itself sitting on this platform, its round body and blunt nose motionless as it watches the boat pass. Voles are shy creatures, but this one has grown accustomed to you over the years, and it does not dive or flee, only watches with its small, bright eyes until you have drifted beyond its territory. The sight of it is a small gift, a confirmation that the pond's wild inhabitants are thriving, and you file the observation away in your memory with all the others. Further along, you approach a patch of the bank where a young willow has begun to lean too far over the water, its trunk angled at a slant that will eventually become a problem if it falls during a storm. You stop the boat and examine the tree carefully, noting the healthy condition of its bark, the new growth at its branch tips, the stability of the soil around its base. It is not in danger of falling yet, perhaps not for several years, but you will mention it to the steward when you next see him, a quiet word about perhaps cutting a branch or two to lighten its load. The steward is a man much like yourself, quiet and methodical, and he will understand the need without a long discussion. You push on, leaving the willow to its slow lean, its leaves rustling in the new breeze that has risen with the sun. The breeze is the first you have felt all morning, a soft movement of air that comes from the east and carries the scent of cut grass from the parkland beyond the pond. It ruffles the surface of the water, turning the dark reflection of the alders into a shimmer, and it stirs the reed plumes so that they sway with a soft, dry sound like the turning of old paper. The breeze is welcome, for it keeps the pond healthy by breaking up the stillness and bringing oxygen to the water, and you feel it on your face as a cool touch that balances the growing warmth of the sun. Your tunic lifts slightly in the breeze, and the boat rocks a little more than before, but you adjust your stance without thinking, your body automatically compensating. The morning is advancing, and the routine of checking, observing, and adjusting is nearly complete for today. You have inspected the wattle scrings and found them sound, cleared the overflow and tested the sluice, taken your bread and cheese and water, checked the clarity, and noted the condition of the leaning willow. Each task has been performed with the same slow care, none of them rushed or skimped, and each has contributed to the quiet structure of your morning. The pond, for its part, has accepted your presence with its usual silence, and the carp and the voles and the heron have gone about their own routines alongside yours, each of you part of the same loose, ancient pattern. There is one more small thing you do, a habit that is not strictly a task, but that you perform anyway. You guide the boat to the very center of the pond, where the water is deepest and the reeds are farthest away, and you stop there, letting the pole trail while you stand still. From this point, you can see the whole pond in a slow, sweeping circle. The reed beds to the south and east, the older wood to the north, the old willow to the west, and the manor house chimney, just visible above the trees. The water around you is a wide, dark disk, broken only by the ripples of the breeze, and the sky above is a pale, washed blue with a few high clouds that are beginning to form in the warming air. You stand there for a long minute, not thinking, not planning, simply being in the center of the water that has been your life's work. After that pause, you take up the pole and turn the boat toward the reed channel that leads back to the landing stage. The morning is still young, but the heavy work of the day is done, and the rest is only the slow poling home, the reeds parting and closing behind you as they did when you first pushed off in the mist. The world has changed from grey to gold, from cold to warm, and you have moved through it with the same quiet rhythm that your father and grandfather moved before you. A rhythm that is too slow to be called work, too steady to be called rest. Something in between that has no name, but that fills your days with a deep, wordless peace. With the mist now thinned to a few trailing wisps and the sun fully established above the alders, the pond opens its quiet soundscape to you, in a way that the earlier grey silence had held muffled and close. You pause your poling to let the boat drift, the ash pole resting across the gunwales while you stand motionless, and you give your attention over entirely to the layered voices of the morning. The first sound that reaches you comes from far beyond the pond's edge, a distant cawing of rooks in the copse behind the manor house, their calls crossing the parkland as a soft, rolling murmur that rises and falls without pattern. The rooks have been awake for some time, their colony stirring since the first light touched the tops of the oaks, and now their conversation is a steady background noise, a comfortable, rough-edged music that speaks of nests and territorial squabbles and the business of a new day. You have heard this sound every morning of your working life, and it has become so familiar that you would notice its absence more than its presence, a part of the world as constant as the water itself. Closer at hand, within the pond's own boundaries, a different set of sounds begins to emerge as the warmth encourages the smaller creatures to activity. A frog leaps from a lily pad a few yards to your left, its body making a soft, wet plop as it enters the water, and the lily pad bobs on the resulting ripples with a gentle, repeated dip and rise. The frog itself has vanished into the darker water under the pads, but its leap leaves behind a faint green scent of disturbed pondweed that drifts across the surface for a moment before dispersing. Seconds later, another frog calls from somewhere deep in the reeds, a low, purring croak that is over almost as soon as it begins, a single note that seems to ask a question and then withdraw it. The frogs are not yet in full chorus that will come later in the spring, but their scattered voices are a sign that the day has warmed enough to stir them from their nighttime stillness. Near your boat, a dragonfly hovers at eye level, its four wings beating so fast that they appear as a blur of transparent motion, producing a dry, buzzing rattle that is more felt than heard. The dragonfly's body is a brilliant blue-green, a needle of color against the softer tones of the pond, and it darts sideways to inspect a reed stem before returning to its original position, as if it has found nothing of interest and is content to hang in the air. The buzz of its wings rises and falls as it adjusts its hover, a tiny engine of sound that you can track even when you look away. There are other dragonflies about, 3 or 4 that you can see, each patrolling a small territory over the open water, and their paths intersect in brief silent acknowledgements before they veer apart. The boat itself contributes its own quiet voice to the soundscape, a voice you know as intimately as your own breathing. As the hull rocks on the small wavelets stirred by the morning breeze, the oak planks shift against each other with a soft, low creak that is less a sound than a slow exhalation of wood. This creak comes from the joints where the ribs meet the planking, from the slight flex of the flat bottom as it rides the water, and from the oarlock where the pole rests, its iron fork tapping gently against the ash with each motion of the boat. None of these creaks is loud or sudden. They blend together into a continuous gentle conversation of stressed timber and cooling air, a sound that has accompanied you through every morning you have spent on the pond. The boat's creak is the sound of age and service, of oak that was cut from the estate's woodland and shaped by a boatwright's hands, of tar and hemp and years of patient use. The water itself is not silent, though its sounds are so subtle that you must be perfectly still to catch them. As the light breeze ruffles the surface, tiny wavelets lap against the hull with a sound like 1,000 small mouths sipping at the wood, a continuous liquid whisper that never quite repeats itself. Where the water meets the reed stems, it makes a soft, hollow plocking sound, the stalks tapping against each other as they sway, their hollow interiors amplifying the contact into a series of low, musical thuds. And beneath all these surface noises, there is the deeper, almost inaudible sound of the pond's life. The faint clicks and rustles of insects moving through the water column, the occasional soft gulp of a fish taking air from the surface film, the distant splash of a coot diving for weed. You become aware as you stand listening of how sound travels over the pond's surface, carried and shaped by the water and the mist and the surrounding ring of trees. The rook's cawing from the copse arrives with a slight delay, as if it has to cross a distance greater than the actual yards, and it is softened by the journey, stripped of its harsher edges, so that it arrives as a gentle, rounded sound. The splash of a fish near the far bank reaches you a heartbeat after you see the ripples, the visual and the auditory arriving in sequence rather than together, a small reminder of the pond's scale. The mist, even in its thin state, still muffles some frequencies, absorbing the sharper notes and leaving only the softer ones, so that the whole soundscape has a cushioned, velvety quality. A sudden, heavy wing beat pulls your attention to the northern end of the pond, where a grey heron lifts off from the shallows with a slow, laboured motion that seems at odds with its eventual grace. The heron's wings beat deeply, each stroke producing a low, rushing thump that travels across the water with surprising clarity, a sound like the working of a great, feathered bellows. The bird's long legs trail behind it, its neck folds back into an S-curve, and it rises above the alders with a few more powerful strokes before leveling off and gliding away toward the next valley. The sound of its departure fades gradually, the wing beats becoming fainter and more spaced until they merge with the general quiet. The heron has left behind a stillness that seems deeper than before, a silence that settles back over the shallows like a blanket. In that returning silence, you notice the smaller, more persistent sounds that the heron's departure briefly overshadowed. A family of coots is muttering in the reed bed to the east, their calls a series of short, metallic ticks and low, bubbling notes that sound like a conversation held in half-voice. One of them emerges from the reeds, a dark, round bird with a white shield on its forehead, and it paddles across an open patch of water with quick, jerky head movements, its feet making small, splashing sounds that are surprisingly loud in the quiet air. It dives suddenly, leaving a swirl, and the water closes over it with a soft slurp the ripples spreading outward until they disappear. The reeds themselves are not voiceless, for as the breeze strengthens slightly, their stems rub against each other with a dry, rustling sound that is the voice of autumn waiting to arrive. The tall plumes bend and sway, their feathery tops brushing together in a soft, continuous hush that sounds like the distant memory of rain. Lower down, the greener leaves click and tap where they touch, producing a delicate, percussive music that has no rhythm but a kind of gentle order. You've often thought, though you have never said it aloud, that the reeds sound like the pond breathing. A slow inhale when the breeze rises and a slow exhale when it falls, the air moving through the stems as it moves through the pipes of a great, silent organ. The insects that live among the reeds add their own thin threads of sound to the tapestry. Midges and gnats form small, whining clouds over the water, their collective hum a high, thin note that wavers in and out of audibility. A late bumblebee drones past the boat, its flight slow and seemingly aimless, its deep, buzzing note descending in pitch as it passes and then rising again as it disappears into the flowers of a water mint on the bank. The bee's sound is the only one that seems to have a definite beginning and end. Most of the other insect noises blend into a continuous soft vibration that you feel on your skin as much as you hear it with your ears. From the direction of the manor house, you hear the distant carrying sound of a door closing, a faint thud that rolls across the parkland and reaches you as a barely perceptible boom. It is the first human sound, other than your own, that you have heard all morning, and it tells you that the household is beginning to stir. A horse whinnies somewhere beyond the yew hedge, a thin, high call that is answered by another, and then the silence returns. For the manor's waking is a slow, quiet affair that does not intrude on the pond's peace. You are grateful for this, as your father was grateful before you, that the nobleman's household keeps no hunting dogs that would bark at the dawn and no cockerels that would crow. Their absence a deliberate choice made long ago by a lord who valued the quiet of his mornings. You shift your weight slightly, and the boat creaks in response, a sound that draws your attention back to your own small sphere. The creak is followed by the soft slosh of water under the hull, and then by the drip of the pole as you lift it briefly to change its position, the droplets falling back into the pond with a scattered, rhythmless patter. Each drip makes its own tiny sound, a high, clear plink that is the shortest possible note, and the ripples it creates are the smallest possible circles. You watch them spread and vanish, and you listen to the way the sound of each drip is swallowed by the larger quiet, absorbed into the general hush of the morning. Your own breathing is a part of this soundscape, a steady, slow rhythm that you can hear when you turn your attention inward, the air moving in and out of your lungs with a softness that matches the breeze. Your breath is not loud, not labored, simply a continuous presence that has been there since the first push into the mist, a sound so constant that you usually forget it entirely. Your heart, too, makes its own quiet beat, a deep, regular thud that you feel more than hear, its rhythm in time with the creak of the boat and the lap of the water and the distant call of the rooks. All the rhythms of the pond seem to align in moments like this, your body's rhythms matching the world's, until the boundary between inside and outside becomes thin and unimportant. A sudden splash, louder than anything you have heard for several minutes, breaks the stillness. A carp has leapt near the willow, its body clearing the water by an inch or two before falling back with a heavy, slapping impact that echoes across the pond. The splash is a complex sound, beginning with the sharp smack of the fish hitting the surface, continuing with the deeper gurgle of the water closing over it, and ending with the fainter, secondary splashes of the displaced water raining back down. The ripples from this event reach your boat a few seconds later, rocking it gently, and you steady yourself with a hand on the gunwale while the sound fades into memory. The carp leaps sometimes on summer mornings, a behavior that no one has ever fully explained to you, perhaps to shake off parasites or simply for the joy of being a fish in clean water, and you accept it as you accept everything else on the pond, without needing a reason. After the carp's splash, the silence that returns is deeper than before, a silence that is not empty, but full of the after echoes of the sound that has passed. Your ears, momentarily sharpened, pick out the tiniest noises, the squeak of a water beetle crawling up a reed stem, the papery rustle of a dragonfly's wings as it lands, the distant bell-like note of a stone curlew from the far pasture. These sounds are so faint that they might be imagined, but you have learned over the years to trust your ears, and you let them wander across the pond's surface, picking up each small voice and letting it go. The soundscape of the pond is a thing of infinite detail, a tapestry woven from 100 quiet threads, and you are the only human who ever hears it in full. The breeze drops for a moment, and in the sudden perfect stillness you hear the sound of the pond's own body, the deep, silent hum of a living system at rest. This is not a sound that can be measured or described, only sensed, a presence that underlies all the other noises and gives them their meaning. It is the sound of water holding fish, of mud settling, of plants growing, of light warming, of a world that asks nothing and gives everything. And you stand in the middle of it, your pole resting, your breath slow, your ears full of the quiet music that has played here since the first water filled the clay basin and will play here long after you are gone. The sun, which has been climbing behind the alderwood for the past hour, now clears the topmost branches and sends its first full light across the pond in a long, golden slant that touches everything it finds. The change is not sudden, but gradual, a slow transformation that has been building since the first pale hint of dawn, and now it reaches a point where the pond becomes a different place than it was in the grey mist. You notice the shift first on the surface of the water itself, which has been a dark, muted brown-green for most of the morning, and now begins to take on a polished quality, a sheen like the surface of old bronze that had been rubbed smooth by many hands. The light does not simply sit on the water, it enters it, penetrating the upper inches and scattering into a soft, diffuse glow that makes the whole pond seem lit from within. Your flat-bottomed boat moves through ribbons of mist that still linger in the cooler hollows near the reed beds, and these ribbons are no longer grey, but have turned a luminous white, glowing like thin gauze where the sun strikes them directly. The mist swirls slowly as you push through it, parting around the bow in coils that catch the light and hold it for a moment before fading into transparency. Each strand of mist is made of countless tiny droplets, and these droplets now act as small prisms, bending the sunlight into faint hints of color that are too subtle to name, a mere suggestion of warmth in the air. As the boat glides forward, the mist ahead of you is white, and the mist behind you is already vanishing, so that the pond opens before and closes after in a gentle, silent process. The surface of the water, where it lies beyond the mist, has turned from pewter to a polished brown-green that reflects the overhanging oaks with a fidelity that is almost mirror-like, where the water is still and slightly broken where the breeze touches it. The oaks themselves, ancient trees that grow along the north bank, have leaves of a deep, glossy green that the sun now illuminates from above, and their reflection in the pond is a darker version of themselves, a wavering image that trembles when a fish rises or a dragonfly skims too low. You watch these reflections as you pole, and you see that they are not perfect copies but softened impressions, the greens blending with the brown of the water to create a color that exists only on this pond, in this light, at this hour. Your pole, when you lift it from the water, leaves a gentle whirlpool that catches the light and turns it into a spinning coin of gold, a brief, bright spiral that widens and flattens and disappears. The droplets that fly from the pole as it arcs through the air are not the colorless beads they were in the mist, but tiny globes of amber, each one holding a pinpoint of sunlight before it falls back to the surface. When the pole enters the water again, it breaks the reflection of the sky into 100 shifting fragments, and then the fragments reassemble as the water calms, a process that repeats with every stroke and never looks quite the same twice. The rhythm of this breaking and mending becomes a quiet visual music that your eyes follow without effort, a pattern that is soothing in its predictability. The reeds along the edge of the pond have taken on a new character in this light, their tall stems no longer a uniform grey-green, but a complex tapestry of gold, amber, and olive. The sun illuminates each stalk from the side, so that the smooth surfaces gleam, and the nodes, those solid rings that divide the stems into sections, cast tiny shadows like the rungs of a ladder. The long, narrow leaves catch the light on their upper surfaces, which have a faint sheen, while their undersides remain in shadow, creating a two-tone effect that shifts as the breeze stirs them. The shadows of the reeds fall across the water in thin, dark lines that tremble with every movement, a lattice of light and dark that the boat passes through without disturbing, for the shadows are only on the surface and the boat is under them. You notice as you guide the boat along the reed margin that the brown feathery plumes at the tops of the stalks are now backlit by the sun, so that each one becomes a cloud of soft, glowing filaments, a golden-brown aureole that seems to float above the green stems. The light passes through the fine hairs of the plumes and turns them translucent, revealing a delicacy of structure that was invisible in the mist, and the whole reed bed has the appearance of a vast unlit chandelier waiting for someone to notice it. A single plume, broken by the wind some days ago, trails its tip in the water, and where it touches, the surface tension bends the light into a tiny rainbow-edged dimple. The old willow on the far bank is now fully illuminated, its drooping branches a cascade of pale green and silver that shimmers with every stir of air. The willow's bark, deeply furrowed and dark when wet, has dried to a warm grey-brown, and the sun picks out the ridges and valleys of the trunk with a clarity that makes the tree seem closer than it is. The trailing branches that touch the water send out small circular ripples, and these ripples catch the light and become rings of gold that expand outward until they dissolve. The shade under the willow is deep and cool, a pocket of shadow that moves slightly as the branches sway, and the carp gather there as they always do. Their dark shapes just visible in the dimness, the scales of the old mirror catching an occasional glint like a coin dropped into the depths. The water lilies that grow near the overflow channel have begun to open their flowers in response to the warming sun, the pale pink petals unfurling slowly, so slowly that you cannot see the movement, but only its results when you look again after a few minutes. Each open flower is a cup of light, the petals a delicate blush pink at the tips fading to pure white at the center, and the golden stamens glow like tiny threads of sunlight woven into a ring. The round green leaves that float around the flowers have a slightly waxy surface that repels the water, and the droplets that fall from your poles sit on those leaves as perfect trembling spheres that magnify the leaf veins beneath them. The reflection of the lilies in the water is a paler version of themselves, a ghost flower that mirrors the real one petal for petal but sways in a different rhythm. A damselfly lands on the gunwale of your boat, its body a slender needle of metallic blue that shines with a vivid, almost electric color in the direct sun. Its four wings are sheets of the thinnest glass, veined with a delicate dark network, and they catch the light and turn it into tiny rainbows that shift as the insect adjusts its position. The damselfly's large eyes are compound domes of gleaming black that reflect the pond and the sky and your own shape in miniature, 1,000 tiny images on each eye. It rests there for a minute, its wings flickering occasionally with a movement too fast to see, and then it lifts away and darts across the water, its blue body drawing a line of light that vanishes as soon as it is drawn. The spiderwebs that you saw earlier in the mist, those strings of tiny droplets strung between the reed stems, have now dried into fine silk threads whose existence is revealed not by the droplets, but by the way they catch the sun. Each silk line gleams like a strand of silver when the light strikes it at the right angle, and the whole web becomes visible as a complex geometric pattern of great intricacy, a wheel of light that the spider sits at the center of, waiting. The spider itself is a small brown creature, its body round and its legs slender, and the sun turns dewdrops on its back into a dusting of tiny brilliance. You pass close enough to see the web in all its detail, and then the boat moves on and the angle changes, and the web disappears, becoming invisible against the reeds once more. The open water in the center of the pond now has a depth of color that it lacked in the mist, the brown-green surface brightening toward the shallows and darkening toward the deep parts where the old stream channel runs. You can see the gradations clearly, the way the color tells you the depth without any need for the pole. The dark green of the deep water is a cool, restful color, and the paler green of the shallows is warm and inviting, and the line between them is a soft, blurry boundary that moves slightly with the light. The carp that swim across this boundary seem to change color as they go, their backs pale bronze in the shallows and dark olive in the deeps, their bodies adjusting their appearance to the water around them. The sun has climbed high enough now that it falls directly on your shoulders and back, and you feel its warmth through the wool of your tunic, a spreading heat that is pleasant without being hot. The pole, which was cool and damp earlier, has dried in your hands and feels warm to the touch. The ash grain showing more clearly now that the dark wetness has evaporated. Your shadow, when you look down, is a sharp, dark shape on the bottom, moving with the boat, its edges crisp in the clear water. The shadow of the boat itself is a larger, softer shape, a dark rectangular patch that glides over the sediment, and the small fish that hover near the bottom move aside as the shadow passes over them, then return to their positions. The light on the water is not static, but constantly shifting, a living thing that changes with the movement of the clouds and the breeze and the angle of the sun. A high, thin cloud passes over the sun, and the pond dims for a moment, the colors muting, the reflections dulling, the whole scene taking on a softer, more diffused quality that is as calm as the brighter light, but different in its feeling. Then the cloud passes, and the light returns, and the pond brightens again, with a subtle flaring of color that makes the green greener, and the gold deeper, and the reflections sharper. The carp, whose dark shapes had faded into the dimmer water, reappear as if they had never left, their scales flashing with renewed brilliance. The distant parkland beyond the pond is now clearly visible through the gaps in the elders, the smooth green slope of the lawn rising toward the manor house, and the sheep that graze there are white dots on a green field, motionless at this distance. The manor house chimney, which was a faint grey smudge in the mist, is now a pale stone column with a thin wisp of smoke rising straight up into the still air. The smoke is pale grey against the pale blue sky, and it bends slightly at the top where the upper breezes catch it, but it rises steadily, a quiet sign that the house is waking and the kitchen fires are lit. None of this activity touches the pond. It is simply there, a backdrop, a wider world that you are aware of, but not part of. The reflection of the sky and the water has now taken on the pale blue of the morning, with a few high clouds mirrored as soft white patches that drift across the pond's surface in silent parallax with their originals. When you look into the water, you see the sky as clearly as if you were looking up, the blue just as deep, the clouds just as white, the infinity of the heavens compressed into a few feet of dark water. The illusion is so complete that you sometimes lose your sense of depth, the water and the sky blending at the edges of your vision, and you feel for a moment as if you were suspended in the air, poling through a sky that holds no horizon. The heron, which has been standing motionless in the shallows for an hour, is now a statue of grey and white in the full light, its long beak poised and its crest feathers ruffling in the breeze. The sun catches the pale grey of its back and turns it silver, and the dark flight feathers along its wings have a slight, oily sheen. The heron's shadow falls on the water, a long, thin shape that stretches away from its feet, and the fish that swim near it keep their distance, seeming to recognize the danger even in stillness. You watch the heron for a while, but it does not strike, and you pole on, leaving it to its patient vigil. The light has now reached a point where it seems to fill the whole world. The last of the mist burned away, the pond open and bright and warm. The colors are at their most vivid, the greens deep and the browns rich, the blues pale and the whites clean, and the air itself seems to have a golden tint, a faint honey-colored glow that is the dust of summer and the residue of the morning's humidity. Your eyes, accustomed to the dimness of the misty start, take in this brightness without strain, and you feel a quiet alertness that is not excitement but simply a full engagement with the world around you. The boat moves through this world of light as silently as it did through the mist, the pole lifting and dipping, the whirlpool spinning and fading. The dew on a spider's web between two reed stems has become a string of tiny prisms, each droplet catching the sun and breaking it into a complete spectrum of color, a miniature rainbow that hangs in the air and trembles with every breath of wind. You pause to look at it, the boat drifting to a stop, and you see the colors as clearly as if they were painted on glass, the red at the top, the orange and yellow, the green and blue, the violet at the bottom, each one distinct and perfect. The web shivers, and the rainbows shift, and you watch until the web steadies and the colors return to their places, a small, silent marvel that no one but you will ever see. You push on, and the sun continues its slow climb, the shadows of the reeds shortening, the water warming, the pond turning from morning into full day. The light, which was a pale gold when it first touched the water, is now at clear, bright white gold that promises a warm afternoon, and you know that soon you will turn the boat toward the landing stage and end your morning circuit. But for now, you are still in the center of it all, moving through ribbons of light as you once moved through ribbons of mist, and the pond holds you in its quiet, sunlit hands, asking nothing, giving everything. Your morning circuit is nearly complete, and as you guide the boat along the northern edge of the pond, where the alder wood draws back to reveal a long view across the parkland, you allow your gaze to lift from the water and the reeds to the wider estate that lies beyond. From the water, seen through gaps in the reed fringe that open and close as the breeze sways the stems, the nobleman's land unfolds as a series of gentle, composed pictures, each one framed by the dark green of the trees and the pale sky above. The parkland rises from the pond's edge in a slow, grassy slope that has been grazed by sheep for so many generations that the turf is as smooth as a laid cloth. Its color a soft yellow-green in the morning light. The slope is dotted with a few old oaks that were already large when your grandfather was young, their wide crowns casting pools of shadow that the sheep rest in when the afternoon grows warm. Though now the sheep are scattered across the open grass, small white shapes that hardly move. A dark line of yew hedge crosses the parkland about halfway up the slope, a formal boundary that separates the wilder pasture from the gardens near the manor house. The yew has been clipped for centuries into a dense, flat-topped wall that stands twice the height of a man, its foliage so dark a green as to be almost black against the brighter grass, and it draws a long, straight shadow across the lawn that creeps slowly westward as the sun rises. Through a gap in the hedge, a set of stone steps descends from the terrace gardens, their treads worn into shallow curves by the passage of feet, and you can just make out the pale blur of the steps from here. A faint interruption in the green. No one is on those steps now, and the hedge stands as a quiet sentinel, marking the boundary between the working park and the refined space near the house. The manor house itself sits on the crest of the slope, a long, low building of pale grey stone whose windows catch the morning sun and turn it into squares of pale gold. From the pond, the house is barely visible as a soft grey rectangle through the distant trees, its roof a darker grey against the sky, and its chimneys rising in a cluster at each end. The thin, vertical line of smoke that you noticed earlier still rises from the kitchen chimney, perfectly straight in the still air of the lower atmosphere, then bending slightly as it reaches the upper breezes and fraying into a soft grey smudge that dissolves into the blue. The house seems asleep, its windows still shuttered or curtained, and the only sign of life beyond the smoke is the occasional flash of a white apron as a servant moves through the kitchen garden at the back, a figure too small and distant to be more than a moving dot of white. The kitchen garden itself is a walled enclosure that you have visited only rarely, a place of espaliered fruit trees and neat rows of vegetables, its brick walls trapping the sun's warmth and ripening the peaches and figs that the nobleman's cook sends to the table. From the pond, you can see the top of the wall and the upper branches of an old pear tree that overhangs it, the pears already swelling into their autumn ripeness and showing as small brownish-green shapes among the leaves. The wall has a small wooden door that opens onto the parkland, and this door stands open now, a dark rectangle in the brick, suggesting that the gardener has begun his work and will soon be moving among the beds with his hoe and watering can. Beyond the house and the garden, the estate spreads outward in a patchwork of hedgerows and small fields that rise into the low hills to the west. Those hills are a soft, hazy blue in the morning light, their outlines blurred by the last of the mist that still clings to the valleys, and the patchwork of fields on their slopes is a quiet mosaic of pale gold stubble, darker green pasture, and the occasional block of woodland. A thin ribbon of road crosses the hills, visible only as a paler line among the fields, and on that road a cart is moving very slowly, its load of hay making a tall brown shape that rocks gently with the motion. The cart is too far away for you to hear its wheels, and its driver is a figure so small as to be anonymous, a part of the landscape rather than a person. Closer to the pond, on the southern side where the land is flatter, a water meadow stretches away toward the stream's old course, its grass lush and dark where the ground stays damp. This meadow is kept for hay, and it has not been cut yet this year, so the grass stands tall and ripens into seed heads that catch the light and turn the meadow into a rippling sea of pale green and silver. A few cowslips still bloom in the wetter hollows, their yellow flowers bright spots that the sun picks out, like drops of gold on a green cloth, and the meadow hums with insects that you cannot see, but whose sound carries as a soft, continuous drone when the breeze drops. The stream that feeds the pond runs through this meadow in a shallow, reedy ditch, its water clear and slow, and you can trace its course by the line of darker green that marks its banks. The wider estate has a stillness to it at this hour that matches the stillness of the pond, a sense that the whole landscape is holding its breath before the business of the day begins. No one else is awake in the way that you are awake, the first human being moving in this world of grass and water and trees. The bailiff's role is to be this first presence, to keep the boundary between water and land, to move through the quiet morning before anyone else stirs, and you have come to feel that this is not a duty, but a privilege, a gift of solitude that the pond gives you in exchange for your care. The estate reveals itself to you in these early hours in a way that it reveals to no one else, and you keep that knowledge quietly, without pride, as simply another fact of the work. Your view of the wider estate shifts as the boat moves, the gaps in the reeds opening and closing, each new frame showing a slightly different picture. Through one gap you see the pale stone of the manor house quite clearly, its mullioned windows glinting, and then the boat drifts forward and the house is hidden again by a thick stand of reeds, replaced by a view of the yew hedge and the stone steps. Through another gap you catch a glimpse of the deer that sometimes graze the parkland in the early morning, a small herd of fallow deer with pale spotted coats that are almost invisible against the grass. The deer are motionless, their heads raised and their ears turned toward the pond, and they watch the boat with a calm curiosity that holds no fear. Then the reeds close and the deer are gone, and when the next gap opens a moment later, they have moved a few yards to the left, their heads down again to the grass. A pigeon flies across the parkland, its wings clapping sharply on the upstroke, the sound carrying across the water with a surprising clarity. The pigeon is a blue-grey color with a white patch on its neck, and it flies in a straight, purposeful line toward the woods on the hill, its flight a brief moving element in the still tableau. After it passes, the sky is empty again except for the high white clouds that are beginning to build slightly as the morning warms, their shapes soft and rounded like piles of fleece. The boat has now drifted along the northern edge, far enough that you can see the line of the estate's boundary wall, a low stone wall that runs from the alderwood up over the slope and into the distance. The wall is old, built in the same century as the pond, its stones covered in a patchwork of grey and orange lichen that looks like paint applied by a careful hand. The wall separates the parkland from the lane that connects the estate to the village beyond, though the village itself is hidden in a fold of the hills and you have never seen it from the pond. You know it only as a cluster of roofs and the sound of a church bell on Sundays, a distant, sonorous note that reaches the pond at midday if the wind is right. But the village feels far away and unimportant from here, a separate world that the wall keeps gently apart. Your attention returns from the wide views to the nearer, more intimate landscape of the pond's own margin, and you notice the transition as a quiet, inward movement of the mind. The reeds close around the boat again, and the parkland and the manor house fade into the background, still present but softened by the green curtain of stems. The pond regathers you into its close quiet, and the sound of the water lapping at the hull returns as the dominant voice, the wider world withdrawing to a polite distance. This is how the pond works, you think. It opens to the world and then closes again, holding its own space, and you are the only one who moves freely between the two. The yew hedge, now half hidden by the reeds, draws a dark line across your memory of the view, and you think of the times you have walked past it on the rare occasions when the steward asks you to report to the house. The hedge is even more imposing up close, its foliage dense and its branches twisted into ancient, contorted shapes under the smooth, clipped surface, and the sound of the shears that trim it is a sharp, metallic snipping that seems to belong to a different world than the soft sounds of the pond. The gardens beyond the hedge are formal, with gravel paths that crunch underfoot and roses that scent the air with a sweetness you find almost overpowering after the clean, subtle smells of the water. You are always glad to leave those gardens and return to the pond, to the boat and the pole, and the quiet, unmanicured life of the reeds and the fish. The manor house chimney now releases a slightly thicker puff of smoke, pale grey against the pale sky, and it reminds you that the kitchen fires are being stoked for the morning meal. Somewhere inside that house, the nobleman and his family are beginning their day, rising from their beds and taking their warm water and their fresh bread and their boiled eggs. Their lives are as distant from yours as the village is, a parallel existence that touches yours only at the edges. A request for Carp, a report to the steward, a quiet word about the leaning willow. You are content with this distance, for it preserves the pond as your domain, a place where no lord walks and no servant intrudes, a place that belongs to the water and the reeds and the bailiff who watches over them. The boat moves past the last of the open views and back into the deep reed channel that leads toward the landing stage, and the wider estate disappears behind a solid wall of stems and plumes. The world shrinks again to the corridor of green and the dark water and the gentle creak of the boat, and you feel a quiet sense of return, a closing of the circle that began when you pushed off into the mist. The parkland and the house and the hills are still there, still bathed in the same morning light, but they are no longer visible, and they become, in your mind, a pleasant background thought, a landscape that exists without needing to be seen. The pond is its own world, a self-contained quiet, and you and the boat and the pole are the slow heartbeat of the estate, a pulse that moves through the water while the sun climbs and the greater world waits. The boat emerges from the reed channel into the small open area before the landing stage, and you feel the familiar sense of return settle over you, a quiet recognition that the morning circuit is drawing to its natural close. The sun is now fully up, the mist gone entirely from the water and the banks, and a soft warmth spreads across your shoulders and the back of your neck as you turn the boat with one last gentle push. The landing stage is just ahead, a simple wooden platform of oak planks supported on posts driven into the clay, its surface grey with age and worn smooth by years of your boots, stepping onto it each morning and leaving it each afternoon. The stage has a slight tilt to one side where a post has sunk an inch or two over the decades, but it is still solid, still serviceable, and it waits for you with the patience of a thing that has no other purpose. You take your time with the final approach, letting the boat's momentum carry it forward while the pole rests across the gunwales, its wet tip raised and dripping. There is no hurry in you, none at all, and you stand motionless as the boat glides over the last few yards of dark water, the hull making a soft sighing sound as it parts the surface. The water here is shallower than in the main pond, and you can see the bottom clearly, a mixture of fine gravel and silt that your boots have stirred 1,000 times, the stones rounded and dark. A few small fish, young roach perhaps, dart away from the boat's shadow, their silver bodies flashing once before they vanish into the deeper shade under the platform. The boat kisses the landing stage with a gentle bump that is more a touch than an impact, the oak gunwale meeting the oak post with a soft, woody thud that sounds like a full stop at the end of a long, quiet sentence. The hull settles against the stage, and the ripples from the contact spread outward in a slow, diminishing fan that reaches the reeds and disappears. You let the boat rest there for a moment, still standing, the pole still balanced across the gunwales, while you take in the familiar details of the landing place. The reed-thatched shed, where you store your gear, stands a few yards back from the water, its door hanging open just as you left it, the dark interior smelling of dry reeds and old wood, and the faint, pleasant must of a space that is never fully dry. A moorhen is picking its way along the edge of the landing stage, its red and yellow beak bright against its dark plumage, its long green legs lifting and placing with a careful, deliberate gait. It pauses when it notices the boat, regarding you with one dark eye, then continues its slow progress, pecking at the algae that grows on the damp wood. The moorhen is a permanent resident of this corner of the pond, and it has grown as accustomed to your comings and goings as the carp and the heron, accepting the boat as a moving island that comes and goes without threat. You watch it for a moment, and then you reach for the rope that lies coiled on the deck at your feet. The rope is a length of hemp, dark brown with age and use, its fibers softened by water and handling until it feels almost like a living thing in your hands, supple and warm. One end is tied to the bow ring with a knot that your father first showed you, a bowline that never slips and never jams, its loops and turns so familiar that your fingers could tie it in the dark. You take the free end and step onto the landing stage, the worn leather of your boots finding the solid planks with a sense of homecoming, the slight spring of the wood under your weight, a welcome change from the steady, yielding motion of the boat. The stage is warm from the sun, its surface dry and slightly rough under your soles, and a few woodlice scuttle away from your shadow, seeking the dark gaps between the planks. You pull the boat gently against the stage, the rope sliding through your hands with a faint hissing sound, and you loop it around the mooring post with a simple knot, a pair of half-hitches that hold the boat securely but can be released with a single pull. The post is an old piece of oak, thicker than your arm, its top worn into a smooth dome by the rubbing of countless ropes, and the knot settles against it with a final, snug fit. You give the rope a slight tug to test it, and it holds firm, the boat tugging back with a gentle, floating resistance that is the last communication of the water with the land. You return to the boat for a final time, stepping back onto the deck to retrieve the clay bottle that hangs from its peg under the stern seat, and you feel the boat rock under you with a soft, familiar motion. The bottle is still cool to the touch, and you tuck it under your arm while you gather the leather bag that holds the remains of your bread and cheese. The drawstring pulled tight. You check that the pole is secure, resting properly across the gunwales where it will be ready for the next morning, its ash surface already drying in the sun, the water stains fading to faint, pale marks. The boat is tidy, everything in its place, and you step back onto the landing stage with the bottle and the bag, your feet finding the solid planks once more. You stand on the stage for a long, quiet moment, looking out over the pond that you have just traversed. The water is a sheet of polished bronze green, the reeds a golden brown wall, the alders a dark, quiet presence on the far bank. The old willow trails its branches in the water, the lilies have opened their flowers fully to the sun, and the distant shape of the heron still stands motionless in the shallows. The pond looks exactly as it looked when you first pushed off into the mist, and also entirely different, for the light has changed and the mist has gone, and the world has turned from grey to gold. But the peace is the same, the deep, abiding quiet that has held this place for 100 years and more. You turn away from the water and walk the few steps to the shed, your boots making a soft regular sound on the planks of the stage, and then a quieter sound on the packed earth of the path. The shed's interior is dim and cool after the bright sunlight, and it takes your eyes a moment to adjust. The shapes of the spare sluice boards and the coiled rope and the sickle on its hook emerging slowly from the shadow. You hang the clay bottle on its nail, place the leather bag on its shelf, and take off your felt hat, hanging it on its peg by the door. The hat has dried completely in the sun, its brim still holding a faint curve from being tugged down against the mist, and it will be ready for tomorrow, as ready as you will be. You step out of the shed and close the door behind you, the wooden latch falling into place with a soft, final click that sounds like the end of something, though you know it is only a pause. The path from the shed leads up a gentle slope toward the alderwood and the estate beyond, but you do not take it yet. Instead, you walk back to the edge of the landing stage and stand there, your hands empty, your breathing slow, looking at the boat that rests on the water. The boat is perfectly still now, its flat bottom barely dimpling the surface, its oak ribs and tarred seams and worn gunwales all at rest after the long morning's work. The pole lies across it like a sleeper, one end still wet, the other dry and warm. The rope that holds the boat to the mooring post is taut, but not strained, a gentle, curving line that rises and falls slightly with the boat's breathing. The water around the hull is clear and dark, and the small fish have returned, hovering in the shade under the platform, their bodies motionless except for the faint fanning of their fins. The boat looks as if it has always been there, as if it grew from the water like the reeds, and you feel a quiet, wordless satisfaction in seeing it so. You remain on the stage for a minute that feels longer, your mind not thinking, but simply receiving, taking in the pond's final gift of stillness. The rooks are still calling in the distance. The breeze is still stirring the reed plumes, the sun is still climbing the pale blue sky, and the world is continuing its slow, steady turning. The pond has asked nothing of you but your presence, and you have given it, and now the morning is over, the work is done, and the water settles back into its own quiet life, a life that will continue without you until tomorrow's mist rises and you step into the boat again. You turn away at last, your feet carrying you up the path toward the alderwood and the parkland beyond, your tunic warm on your shoulders, and your boots dusty from the dry earth. You do not look back, for you do not need to. The image of the boat resting on the placid water is already in your memory, a picture that you will carry through the day and into the night. The reeds are motionless, the water is calm, the pole is resting, and the pond awaits the next morning with the same patience it has always had, a patience that is older than the estate, and older than the manor house, and older than any human thing. The empty boat stays behind you, a dark, quiet shape on the brightening water, and the silence that settles over the landing stage is the silence of completion, of a circle closed, of a day begun and a morning passed in the slow, steady rhythm of the pole and the water and the reeds. The pond holds its breath, the fish glide beneath the surface, the heron stands sentinel in the shallows, and the world, for this one small moment in the long history of the water, is at peace.